Chapter 235. Although he unintentionally solved the mystery of the mysterious disappearance of the bank balance, Su Xinqing still had no clue about the theft of Sakura Apartment. Just as he said, theoretically speaking, Sakura Apartments was just an ordinary dilapidated apartment on the outside, and on the inside. But with the protection of the Holy Land, unless there was an enemy of the level of Cthulhu Great Old Ones, it was basically impossible for anyone to invade without permission because of the blessing of the Holy Land. Not to mention the other things, the artifact that Qin Xingyan borrowed with great difficulty could not be dismissed with a smile. Although Su Xinqing could probably defeat the entire sect with just one hand, the problem was that Qin Xingyan originally borrowed it to treat Su Xinqing's only student and Xinghua's family. Now that it was gone, it was probably too late to borrow it again. So the question finally came back to who the thief was. In Jiangjin, the only person who was not affected by the protection of the sacred land and could freely enter and leave this place was Songyu, who had the key to Sakura Apartment. However, she was not the kind of person who would do such a thing. In addition, the spirit ghosts that Su Xinqing did not bring to the other world this time could also freely enter and leave. However, because they had been given a long vacation by Su Xinqing, they were now roaming around the world, causing the number of harmless supernatural incidents to skyrocket during this period of time. It even set off a supernatural craze where tourists lined up to visit haunted places all over the world. Speaking of which, Jiang Yu seemed to be able to appear in Sakura Apartment when she was almost invisible. Although he did not know if she sneaked in behind the tenants of the apartment, she could be considered a special case. However, this time, the train girl also went with him on the trip to the other world, so she could also be eliminated as a suspect. After thinking about it, Su Xinqing could not find a single suspicious person. Could it be that the protection of the sacred land suddenly failed, and at the same time, a thief coincidentally broke in? In short, it's better to leave professional things to the professionals. After careful consideration, Su Xinqing finally came to this conclusion. So you came to find me? Xiao Jingyi rubbed his temples, as if he had a headache. I heard that you've been promoted recently. Congratulations. Su Xinqing, who came here alone, casually found a place to sit down and said, "Isn't catching thieves the job of the police?" Probably because they understood that a powerful existence like Su Xinqing was harmless and also the type to maintain order. The higher-ups felt that it was a waste to place a high-end combat power like Su Feng in Jiangjin. Therefore, when Su Xinqing came to the Public Security Bureau, he heard the police talking about how Su Feng and Antares had been transferred to other places, and Xiao Jingyi, who had obtained the Yuanrong sword and had greatly increased his strength, had been promoted to the head of the Super Administrative Office in Jiangjin. In the words of the higher-ups, he had the ability and insight to take charge of a department. Anyway, even if his ability was not enough, there were still a group of superhumans, or monsters and monsters in Jiangjin. In a sense, in less than half a year, Xiao Jingyi had gone from an ordinary person to the head of a city's supernatural authority. This guy was more like the main character of an urban novel. If you want to catch thieves, go find the police in the Public Security Bureau outside. Xiao Jingyi sighed. He was a little helpless against Su Xinqing's method of using an RPG to kill a fly. Since Director Xiao has something else to do, I'll take my leave first. Before Su Xinqing came in, a girl with straight black hair and wearing a plain black jacket greeted Xiao Jingyi and nodded to Su Xinqing. Then, she stood up and left the office. Who was that? Su Xinqing looked at the girl's figure that disappeared around the corner and asked casually. An international friend, the kind from the United Nations. Xiao Jingyi shrugged. I think she came to find Director Su Feng. Unfortunately, he's not here anymore. You make it sound like he's dead. So you came here this time just to ridicule me, and let me ridicule you? Xiao Jingyi glanced at Su Xinqing. If you keep going like this, I'll tell on your little girlfriend first. Su Xinqing threatened. Feng Shaoqing and I aren't in that kind of relationship. After looking around and making sure there was no one else around, Xiao Jingyi said with a little guilty conscience. Oh, it's not like that yet. Su Xinqing deliberately emphasized the word still and said meaningfully. So Xiao Jingyi coughed, picked up the teacup, and took a sip. Then he calmly decided to change the topic. Stop joking around. Tell me the real purpose of your visit. You don't say, this time I really came to find you to catch thieves. When it came to the main topic, Su Shenxing stopped joking and said seriously. When Xiao Jingyi saw that Su Shenxing was rarely serious, he knew that there was more to the story, so he was not in a hurry to ask questions. Instead, he straightened his posture and listened to him continue. Su Shenxing roughly explained the situation he encountered, and Xiao Jingyi couldn't help but frown. You mean, someone can bypass the barrier you set up and enter your apartment to steal things? It's not a barrier, it's the protection of the Holy Land. Su Shenxing corrected him seriously. Almost. In this regard, Xiao Jingyi, who was like Su Shenxing and even more amateur than Su Shenxing, waved his hand impatiently and replied, when did such a difficult guy appear in Jiangjin? Su Shenxing was the peak of supernatural combat power that Xiao Jingyi had seen in his life. It was hard for the newly appointed Super Administrative Office Director to imagine that there would be a guy more troublesome than Su Shenxing in Jiangjin. It shouldn't be by brute force. Maybe he used a trick to sneak into my apartment, Su Shenxing explained. Otherwise, even if I'm no longer in this world, I would still be able to sense it. Xiao Jingyi imagined Su Shenxing crawling out of the soil with a small chrysanthemum on his head, cursing, who broke into my territory and coming back from the dead. For some reason, he didn't feel that it was out of place. Thus, he decided not to think about it and instead continued to ask, what kind of trick was it? If I knew, would I still report it to the police? Su Shenxing's rhetorical question made Xiao Jingyi speechless. Speaking of which, if you knew who did it, you were going to lynch him, the one in your house. Xiao Jingyi's words were a bit vague, but Su Shenxing knew that he was referring to Mo Li. Because Mo Li had thrown Mo Li out of an apartment many times in the past, Xiao Jingyi would subconsciously tremble every time he mentioned Mo Li. Is there no way to see him? There are some problems. Mo Li will be a bit more restrained in the coming days. Because Su Shenxing and Mo Li had been separated for a short period of time, causing Mo Li to be in a certain degree of unsealing mode for a long time. To be on the safe side, Su Shenxing planned to let the girl enter a deep seal state to stabilize the seal. Mo Li's current level in the deep seal state was about the same as a secret technique apprentice in the other world. Chapter 236. In the end, Su Shenxing threw the responsibility of informing I Ching's family to Xiao Jingyi and left the Public Security Bureau. After returning home, Su Shenxing found that there was a guest at home. Yo, the Earth God, who looked a little dispirited, yawned and greeted Su Shenxing. What a rare guest. Su Shenxing put the cheap oranges he bought on the way on the table and looked at her haggard face. He couldn't help but ask worriedly, is the situation of Jiangjin's spirit veins worsening again? No, with the Jinchuan seal, although the spirit veins are still a little unstable, it's much better than before. The Earth God girl yawned again and replied in a sleepy voice, I'm just a little tired because I stayed up 5 days playing games. What? Why do you look like that? You're referring to Mo Li. PS4 and PSVR were bought jointly with her. It's okay for her to play with them for 2 days. The mushroom-haired girl said confidently. Su Shenxing looked at Mo Li, who looked away guiltily and pretended to be engrossed in watching the slimming belt advertisement on TV. Wait a minute, so you're the one who illegally invaded my house and took away Mo Li's game console? Su Shenxing organized his thoughts and asked the Earth God of Jiangjin. What illegal invasion? She's the Earth God of Jiangjin. All the land in Jiangjin belongs to her. There's no such thing as illegal invasion. It's better to say that you people who live on her land have to pay her rent. Ouch, ouch, ouch. I'm just kidding. Don't use your dragon claw on my head. Su Shenxing let go of his right hand that was grabbing her head like a basketball and said indifferently, but there's nothing on your chest that I can use my dragon claw on. I mean there's nothing to use my dragon claw on. That's not what I meant. And you don't have to explain. Speaking of which, this is already considered sexual harassment. Be careful of divine punishment when harassing a deity, you bastard. I want the sky to no longer be able to cover my eyes. Isn't this already considered plagiarism? And it's super old. It doesn't matter. Su Shinxing gave him a thumbs up. The guy in the original work was just bragging. As long as I can really do it, it won't be considered plagiarism. Don't kill the heavens for sexual harassment.
Ah.
After joking around, Su Shinxing asked the Earth God curiously, "By the way, how did you get into the house?" In theory, even the Earth God who had the ability to escape through the earth could not pass through the protection of the holy land outside Sakura Apartments. Even though she and Su Shinxing were acquaintances, she was not a tenant of Sakura Apartments. So, she did not have the privilege of freely entering and exiting Sakura Apartments like Qin Xingyan and the others. I came in together with that little girl called Song Yu. That girl comes here every 2 days to clean the room. You brat, your luck with women is not bad. The Earth God lowly teased with a wretched smile like an uncle. Su Shinxing coughed a little awkwardly. For some reason, he felt that the gazes of the other tenants were a little piercing. Ahem, don't mess around. She and I are just pure revolutionary friends, okay? Su Shinxing pretended to be righteous and said, but he did not have much confidence in his gestures. Then, as if he had thought of something, he said, but forget about Imo Lee's game console, Qin Xingyan's divine artifact, and the souvenirs that Miss Yamanaka brought over from Japan. Isn't that rude?
Huh. What are you talking about?
The Earth God girl frowned. I'm not interested in that kind of thing. Huh. Su Shinxing rubbed his forehead and was a little surprised. You mean you didn't take those things? Of course, right? If you want to tempt me, you have to at least use the original FGO server account of Zhenri Tian, Color Pen, and Kongming. The Earth God girl said with a look of superiority, but her words were not worthy of respect at all. Are you kidding me? I thought this matter was already solved. Why is it getting more complicated now? Su Shinxing sighed and muttered softly. What's wrong? Did you run into some trouble again? The Earth God girl suddenly became spirited and leaned over to Su Shinxing. We have a professional mystery consultation and investigation target here. It's only 648 yuan to hire them now. Su Shinxing pushed the gloating Earth God girl away and said to Qin Xingyan, who was pretending to watch the TV program with Emoli, but was actually listening to the conversation here. Xingyan, can you talk to your sect and ask them to send someone with tracking and investigation knowledge or ability to help? It's just a joke. You can't even take a joke. How stingy are you? You can break your head and bleed, but you can't lose 648 yuan. You're so stingy that even I feel embarrassed for you. Although that was the case, in the end, the Earth God Lowly, who had lived for hundreds and thousands of years, was indeed more experienced in all aspects, so Su Shinxing still told her what happened in Sakura's apartment. Before looking for the culprit, can you tell me what the missing artifact is? After hearing Su Shinxing's description, the Earth God girl asked from another perspective. Is there a problem? Su Shinxing asked. Divine artifacts are actually a very general concept. Things that have been used by gods can be called divine artifacts. Things that have great power can also be called divine artifacts. In the era when the worship of the earth was at its peak, the banana peels left after people ate the bananas could be worshipped as divine artifacts by temple attendants. Because Su Shinxing didn't know much about this, he looked directly at Qin Xingyan and motioned for her to explain. Qin Xingyan seemed to have heard of this for the first time, so she was stunned for a moment and then said, it's an artifact from Jade Falling Court called Ghost Blade. It looks like a relatively simple bronze sword. Jade Falling Court, Ghost Blade, these two aren't easy to get along with. The Earth God girl's careless expression suddenly became serious. Anything that has anything to do with either of these two things will be troublesome, especially the Ghost Blade. That's a concept that only existed in the primitive world before the 3 realms and the 6 realms were established. Why do you keep provoking these strange, troublesome things? Probably because I'm the protagonist? Su Shinxing thought. But because he felt that now was not the time to joke, he didn't say it out loud. Chapter 237. Actually, I don't know much about the prehistoric age. Most of it was obtained from the inheritance of the Earth God's divinity. While peeling the orange, the Earth Lolita said in a serious voice that was the complete opposite of her actions, But you should also know that since ancient times, the name, size, and even topography of the land have been constantly changing, so the Earth God's divinity is also very different from the past. The information passed down is also not complete. For example, the city of Jiangjin. When I first took over the land, it was still called Hanjiang, and the area was much larger than it is now. It was only later that the city of Jiangjin was redivided into urban areas in modern times, and my territory suddenly shrank by a third. If you think about it this way, the so-called Earth God is pretty much the same as the mayor. Su Xinxing also took an orange and said while peeling it, "Don't compare the Earth God with that kind of civil servant." The Earth Lolita seemed to be very proud of herself as she said, "We are members of an unofficial organization." Su Xinxing had a speechless look on his face. Saying it like that made him feel even weaker. Okay. After passing the peeled orange to Emily, who was eagerly waiting at the table like a puppy looking at him, Su Xinxing then asked, "Then do you know any useful information?" To be honest, I'm not too sure about the situation of the Eldritch world, but judging from some rumors at that time, the Eldritch world is probably not a normal planet. It's incomparably huge. Just the Central Plains alone is much larger than all the land on Earth put together. Outside the Central Plains is the Frozen Wasteland, and north of the Frozen Wasteland is the so-called Guifang land. There is also a saying that the land of Guifang is located at the edge of the world, where the ends of the Earth are. Hainan Sanya? Su Xinxing, whose geography was passable, asked blankly. No, I'm not talking about the end of the world. I'm talking about the literal end of the world. The Earth God, who was eating an orange, choked and said with a bitter face, "But when Lady Hutu established the 6 paths of reincarnation, the Guifang was split apart from the world and fell into the gap between reincarnation, independent of the entire world's reincarnation. To put it simply, the creatures in the Guifang will never die, and no new life will be born there. There were once people who wanted to enter the Guifang in pursuit of eternal life, but as far as I know, none of them succeeded. Similarly, in the official history of the myths and legends, there hasn't been a single person or object of the Guifang that has escaped from that place since the prehistoric times." Su Xinxing frowned slightly as he realized that things were not that simple. "Why do you emphasize the official history of myths?" "Of course it's because there are such situations in the unofficial history." The Earth God girl showed a sly smile. "But because of the clergy, I can only remind you so much. If you want to know the details, you have to find a way to find it yourself. Unlike the immortals who went against the heavens and cultivated to become immortals, although the gods had more power in terms of authority, they were also more restricted by the laws of the world, or the heavenly axiom. Therefore, there were many things that were taboo. It was already good that she could remind them to this extent." Su Xinxing was not dissatisfied with this. As long as it was something that was recorded, he would definitely be able to find the answer in the Cladic Sea. If he really wanted to know the so-called unofficial history, he would take the time to go to Kunlun. But the problem was, what does this have to do with my house being stolen? Su Xinxing scratched his head.
No.
The Earth God girl shrugged. "I'm just saying it casually to let you know how knowledgeable I am."
If you want to show off, just say it.
"You said it so elegantly, but in the end, it's all the same." Su Xinxing cursed in his heart. "Although I don't really want to think so, could it be Song Yu who took it?" Qin Xingyan guessed. "Or maybe it's not necessarily out of malice. Maybe for some reason she took it away?" Su Xinxing felt that what she said made sense, so he simply took out his old flip phone and planned to call Song Yu to ask about it. However, when he took it out, he found that because he did not charge it during his time in the other world, it was already out of battery. Therefore, he could only sigh and take this broken phone to charge it. After charging it for a while, Su Xinxing couldn't wait to turn on his phone when it could be turned on. There were a few missed calls on the phone, but the unknown numbers were either from the bank fraud or 10086. Of the remaining 3 missed calls, 2 were from Song Yu, and the last one was from his father, who had been missing for a long time. His father's call was 3 days ago. Su Xinxing thought about it and felt that with his father's enthusiasm, 3 days was enough for him to go from the Philippines to Guinea. Even if he called now, it would definitely be outside the circle. Therefore, he did not call back and only called Song Yu. "Oh, Our busy man actually still remembers a little girl like me? As soon as the other side picked up the phone, Song Yu's voice, which contained a little bit of resentment, came from the receiver. Sorry. Su Shinxing subconsciously apologized. Well, I forgive you. That's fast. That's right. I'm such a gullible woman, Song Yu said happily as if she was saying, So, why are you looking for me this time? Look at what you're saying. It's like every time I look for you is for something. Su Shinxing said against his will. Is there nothing this time? No, there's something, then it settled. At this time, even Su Shinxing began to feel that he was being too cold to the other side. Pfft. I'm just kidding, don't mind it. Tell me, what do you need my help with this time? Song Yu's voice on the receiver sounded very cheerful, as if she was happy that as a mortal, she could help Su Shinxing. Su Shinxing felt that his tongue was a little tied. She was wholeheartedly thinking about you, but you asked her whether she had stolen your things. Even Su Shinxing felt that this was not a matter of hurting her, but purely a matter of stabbing her heart with a knife. Well, I just want to ask you, when you came to Ying's apartment, did you see a long package? It should have been placed on the sofa. Thus, Su Shinxing asked after careful consideration. A long package? I didn't see it. Is it missing? The smart Song Yu immediately understood Su Shinxing's meaning, but she didn't seem to be angry because she was suspected. Instead, she helped to think for a moment. Could it be that Uncle took it? Uncle? Your father, I met him when I went to your house. Song Yu seemed to recall what had happened at that time, and her voice sounded a little embarrassed. WTF? That bastard father came back from Honduras? Chapter 238. Su Shinxing's father was called Su Dongsheng, and he was an archaeologist. His main subject seemed to be ancient civilization or something, but unfortunately, he didn't make any shocking discoveries, so he was still wandering around the world. This directly caused this guy to be at home for a few days a year. It was precisely because of this that Su Shinxing's mother left Su Shinxing, who was only 5 years old at the time, and ran away with another man. Because of the mysterious source of funding, Su Shinxing's father seemed to be living a good life. Occasionally, he would forget to give Su Shinxing, who was far away in Jiangjin, so until 3 years ago, Su Shinxing's life was very miserable. However, Su Shinxing was also tough. Even like this, he stubbornly refused to look for his mother, who had become a rich man's wife. After knowing that his father was back, Su Shinxing immediately called him. Hello, who is this? Oh, you're not dead yet. Oh, it's Su Shinxing. Chihaya Fukuyama, who was listening to the warm conversation between the father and son, twitched the corners of his mouth. The way you communicate is a bit strange. How did your father know it was you from that sentence? Su Shinxing didn't care about Mr. Einherjar's ridicule. Instead, he continued to speak into the phone. Where are you now? Did you take the things in my apartment? I'm in the laboratory. Speaking of the things in your apartment, I'm telling you, amazing. This is definitely a big discovery. Well, it seems that the real culprit has appeared. I'm telling you, those things belong to my tenant. Don't touch them. I'm going to get them back now. Just in time. Is your tenant here? I have something to ask him. Su Shinxing was silent for a moment. Then he replied, I loved him. *CK off. I didn't ask you. No, that's not what I want to ask. My mother left a long time ago. Anyway, don't mess around. I'll be there soon. After that, Su Shinxing hung up the phone without waiting for his father's reply. Why do I feel that the relationship between you and your father isn't very good? Qin Xingyan hesitated for a moment before he said, It seems that you haven't even logged in your phone number. God knows what my father does all day. He changes his phone every time he goes out. I remember the last time I asked him the reason. It was because I blocked a spear for him when he was hiding from the cannibals in the Amazon. Is that a Nokia phone? I think you're focusing on the wrong thing. After casually complaining, Su Shinxing asked Chihaya Fukuyama, Do you want to go to the deep mountains with me? What am I going to do? Chihaya Fukuyama asked in confusion. Didn't you lose something too? Su Shinxing replied hesitantly, Let's go together to claim the lost item. My father's laboratory. Forget it. You'll find out later. Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama looked at each other with a confused expression. Well, if you say that. In the end, Chihaya Fukuyama agreed uneasily. Therefore, Su Xinxing grabbed Emily, who wanted to sneak back to his computer, and took Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama on the space-time shuttle that looked like a broken van. They headed towards Su Xinxing's father's laboratory. It was worth mentioning that Su Dongxing's PhD was granted by Jiangjin University. Therefore, his laboratory was also attached to Jiangjin University's laboratory building. However, instead of calling it a laboratory, it was more like a warehouse. It was even located in the basement. Every year, after this guy went on a business trip around the world, he would come back with a bunch of random things that were said to be of great archaeological value. At first, Su Xinxing thought that his father was hiding something. He thought that there would be supernatural things in that pile of trash like bronze, pottery, and other random things. However, last year, after he took Mo Li to work as free labor for his father for 3 days to organize the warehouse, he realized nothing at all. What the F***CK is there to hide? He was just overthinking. That pile of trash was just ordinary trash. It had nothing to do with supernatural things. It didn't take long for Su Xinxing and his group to arrive at Jiangjin University. Although it was a little too flashy to bring a group of girls around the university, Su Xinxing was almost immune to magic, so the earth god's ability to burrow into the ground was ineffective against him. Plus, there was no need for him to use the ability of jumping into a building at super high speed that ordinary people couldn't see, which seemed like an ability that would only appear in shonen manga. So, in the end, he decided to go in through the front door. After all, the gossip would die down after a while. The basement of Jiangjin University's laboratory building naturally had the ability to keep the temperature cool in summer and warm in winter. After walking down, everyone felt a subtle chill. After turning on the lights in the corridor, Su Xinxing led Qin Xingyan and the girls around a few corners. They arrived at the door of his father's laboratory. After taking a deep breath, he made up his mind and opened the door of the laboratory. Wow, it's so messy. Chihaya Fukuyama, who used to be a housewife, looked at the scene in front of her and couldn't help but sigh. Indeed, the world behind the door could only be described as messy. If it wasn't for the fact that there was no stench of household garbage, people would probably believe it was a garbage dump. But even so, the air was still filled with the smell of dirt and rust. In short, it wasn't a pleasant smell. In a small space in the middle of the messy room, a middle-aged man with a beard and a white coat, who could be described as a decadent uncle, was yawning. The glass coffee table in front of him was filled with energy drinks such as Red Bull. When he saw Su Xinxing and his group at the door, he couldn't help but smile. Yo, you're here? I haven't seen you in a long time. You've become more like an adult. He opened his mouth and seemed to be very happy. Emily has also grown up. Why do you seem to have shrunk compared to the last time I saw you? Su Xinxing kicked the garbage that was blocking the door, a bronze mask that looked a bit like the Brazilian island of Mirajo, to the side and walked into the laboratory with the others under Su Dongxing's distressed expression. Dad, hand over the things. How can you talk to your dad like that? If there's a father who is only at home 5 days out of 365 days a year, forgets to pay for living expenses for 10 months out of 12 months, and then takes away the tenants' things without their consent, I think his attitude is no different from mine. Su Xinxing said expressionlessly. Ahem, speaking of the things in your apartment, do you know? Su Dongxing awkwardly changed the topic, but when it came to his field of work, he became inexplicably excited. It's unbelievable. Although there's no way to determine the specific age, those things are at least antiques from the Japanese Yayoi era, or even the Shonen era. Don't just take other people's things to test. Wait a minute, what did you say? Su Xinxing subconsciously retorted, then suddenly realized that something was wrong. Chihaya Fukuyama's souvenirs aside, what did Qin Xingyan's ghost blade have to do with Japan? Chapter 239. What are you talking about? It's those clay figurines. Su Xinxing gestured with his hands. However, because of his poor art skills, Su Xinxing couldn't figure out what he was gesturing. The The souvenir I brought from Japan is the dolls. Oh, but it's not right to call it a souvenir. Chihaya Fukuyama frowned. She wasn't used to Chinese, so she deliberated for a long time before saying, Grandpa said that it's something my father passed down from generation to generation. Maybe he felt sorry for abandoning me in the past, so he gave it to me. That's a family heirloom, right? Su Xinxing sighed with a headache. Dad, did you hear that? She's an international friend. Hurry up and give it back to her. Probably influenced by Xiaojingyi, Su Xinxing also used the term international friend. That's a shame. Su Xinxing's father spread his hands and walked to the experiment bench. He rummaged through the dolls, put them in a bag, and handed it back to Chihaya Fukuyama. I'm sorry for taking your stuff. I thought it was my son's stuff. I always thought that this kid wouldn't be able to find another tenant other than Emily. You can take my stuff just because it's mine? Also, how low do you think I am? My son's stuff is my stuff. My stuff is still my stuff. Are you kidding me? That's too old. Not many people understand. Little Emily is so pitiful. He must be starving after being with this kid for so long. Su Xinxing's father ignored the furious Su Xinxing and patted Emily's head. Emily even cooperated and made a sad expression. This naturally made Su Xinxing even angrier. You two, be more serious. Su Xinxing finally calmed down and asked with a frown, Dad, did you only take these dolls? I also took cheese and bacon from the fridge as an accompaniment. F***CK. It wasn't easy for me to snatch these from the Annies when they were on sale. After learning that the food he had secretly stored had been eaten by his father, even Su Xinxing couldn't bear the mental and physical blow. He bent forward in disappointment. This was the so-called OTZ. Dreams and hopes are all gone. No, your dreams and hopes are a bit too shabby, right? Chihaya Fukuyama, who brought back one of the quintessences from Japan, couldn't help but say this. Plus, now is not the time to care about Senior Su's dreams and hopes. Qin Xingyan nodded in agreement. That's too much. Even for me, dreams and hopes are quite expensive, about 30 yuan. Isn't this quite cheap? Qianzhao Shinshan continued to ridicule. It seems like Su Xinxing won't be useful this time. Qin Xingyan looked at Su Xinxing, who was sitting in the corner of the room with his arms around his knees. Emily, who was patting Su Xinxing's head to comfort him, and the girl couldn't help but sigh. Qin Xingyan opened his mouth to speak to Su Dongsheng. He realized that he didn't know how to address him. Just call me Uncle Su, Su Dongsheng said cheerfully as if he saw through Qin Xingyan's concerns. Uncle Su, when you went to Sakura's apartment, did you take the bag on the sofa? Qin Xingyan didn't beat around the bush and asked directly. In fact, at the beginning, Qin Xingyan was a bit worried that Su Xinxing's father was an old monster who could destroy the world with a sneeze. After all, Su Xinxing's strength was beyond the norm, but after talking to him for a while, he realized that Su Xinxing was really just an ordinary person. He felt strange and relaxed a little. With the help of thought steal, Qin Xingyan was sure that if Su Xinxing was lying, his appearance would definitely not escape his eyes.
No.
Su Dongsheng replied blankly. When I went there was nothing on the sofa. I even sat on the sofa with cheese and bacon and drank for a while. It was the truth. So it was someone else who took away the ghost blade? Qin Xingyan couldn't help but feel a little powerless. Even Su Xinxing, who was drawing circles in the corner, was a little depressed. He didn't expect that the 3 suspects they found were not criminals, although 2 of them did take other things in the house. By the way, Su Dongsheng took out a handful of rusty things that looked like knife coins from his pocket and stuffed 2 of them into Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama's hands. This is the first time I've met you two. You should be my son's tenants, right? This is a small gift as a meeting gift. I hope you can accept it. This is an amulet I found in the ancient ruins of Honduras. According to the records, it should be able to ward off evil and exorcise evil spirits. The 2 girls looked at each other and found that although they were a little confused, they had no reason to refuse. In the end, they could only accept the amulet with a bitter smile. And my son, although he's a little clumsy and wooden, I can guarantee that he's kind-hearted. Don't be fooled by his appearance. In fact, he's surprisingly popular with girls. And with his temperament, after the deed is done, he won't be too wicked. You'd better seize the opportunity. Before Su Dongsheng could finish, Su Shenxing picked up a small bronze stick that looked like a 3-star bronze pillar and smashed it down. I'm a pimp for you. Nonsense, that's why I hit you. The son hit the father. You want to go to heaven. 2 dragons playing with a pearl-picking chrysanthemum hand. Aya, you unfilial son. In short, putting aside Su Dongsheng, who was covering his eyes and crying alone in the laboratory because his son had reached the rebellious stage, Su Shenxing and the others returned to Sakura apartment. Doesn't this mean that all the clues are gone? Qin Xingyan, who originally thought that she would gain something this time, was a little depressed. After all, among the people present, the artifact Phantom Slash was the most closely related to her. If she lost it, it would be a little troublesome. Even if Su Shenxing's strength could make Jade Luo Court swallow their anger and not blatantly retaliate, it was not a good thing to provoke some enemies for the Bailu Temple for no reason. They couldn't turn around and destroy the whole family because of their own mistakes, right? Actually, there's another clue. At this time, Su Shenxing, who was leaning his arms on the table and supporting his chin with his hands, slowly said, "Although it's not a very important clue, we can only give it a try." Chapter 240. Although Sakura Apartment's blessing of the Holy Land had a considerable degree of protection, there would be loopholes under certain conditions. The most important one was that when the door of Sakura Apartment was opened through the proper means, from the inside or with a key, the area at the door was not protected, so anyone could enter. If someone saw this and sneaked into Sakura Apartment to steal the artifact when Songyu or Su Shenxing's dad opened the door, then this matter could be explained. By the way, the local loli was able to enter Sakura Apartment and take away Mo Li's game console using this method. Therefore, as long as we know when Songyu and the others came to Sakura Apartment, then we can take a gamble. Su Shenxing continued with a serious face. The alley facing Sakura Apartment's main entrance is monitored. We should be able to see the surveillance through the police's channels. As long as we pull out the surveillance of those few times and investigate the people who entered and exited the alley one by one as suspects, we might be able to find the culprit. This is a bit too, Qin Xingyan said softly and hesitantly. Too presumptuous, right? Su Shenxing understood what the girl wanted to say. Seeing that Su Shenxing was not dissatisfied, Qin Xingyan nodded. To be able to sneak into the apartment when Songyu and the others opened the door without them noticing, they definitely aren't ordinary people, right? Hoping that the culprit was captured by the surveillance camera, sure enough, it's still a bit. It's okay, Mo Li has the see-through skill. No matter if the other party is invisible, concept delusion, or hallucination, she can see clues from the video. Su Shenxing waved his hand and didn't have much doubt about this. But there's no reason for the culprit to come in from the alley, right? It's normal for the culprit to use the ground or simply fly in from the sky. That's why I said this isn't a very important clue. Su Shenxing spread his hands. In short, let's just give it a shot. Since Su Shenxing had already put it this way, Qin Xingyan naturally didn't need to continue arguing with him. After asking Songyu and Su Dongsheng about the time they came to an apartment, Su Shenxing once again ran to Xiao Jingyi's office and asked him, who was so busy that he was disoriented, to help him get a permit to access the surveillance video. Whether it was Songyu or Su Shenxing's father, they were not the type to leave the door open after entering the house. Therefore, there was not much time to copy the surveillance footage. Therefore, it didn't take long for Su Shenxing to return to an apartment with the USB flash drive containing the copies of the surveillance videos. However, before the group of people from Sakura Apartments could start watching the surveillance footage, the doorbell rang at the entrance. Who is it? Although it was very strange who had come to Sakura Apartment at this time, Su Shenxing immediately went to open the door. Outside the door was a woman who looked to be about 25 or 26 years old. She was wearing a plain black coat and had long black hair that was as long as Chang Xiaoxian's, the campus belle of Jiangjin City. She exuded an intellectual vibe from head to toe. Su Shenxing remembered her. He met her in the office last time he went to the super administrative office. Hello. the woman said politely. However, her tone and accent were a bit strange. It was very stiff, as if she didn't often speak Chinese. Thinking about how Xiao Jingyi referred to her as an international friend from the United Nations, this strange part was not incomprehensible. "What can I do for you?" After Su Shenxing looked at her for a moment, he suddenly realized that he seemed to be a bit rude, so he asked, "You are Master Su Shenxing?" The woman didn't answer his question. Instead, she asked a question. Although he felt that her accent was strange, Su Shenxing still nodded. "Are you here to see me?" "I was introduced by Mr. Xiao Jingyi." The woman's words were perfectly articulated, but it sounded even more strange. "It's not convenient to talk here. Can we talk inside?" "That's not impossible," Su Shenxing sighed and invited her into Sakura apartment. Although he had an ominous feeling, Xiao Jingyi did help Su Shenxing solve a lot of problems this time, so he still had to give him a small favor. At least, he had to listen to the other party's plan first. If it was really outrageous, it didn't matter if he refused. Probably because she didn't expect there to be so many people in Sakura apartment. The intellectual woman with long black hair was obviously stunned when she saw Qin Xingyan and the others after entering the apartment. This made Su Shenxing give Xiao Jingyi a thumbs up in his heart. It seemed that the guy didn't reveal the exact situation of Sakura apartment to the other party. Otherwise, she wouldn't show such an expression. However, the guest's psychological quality was very good. She quickly restrained the surprise on her face. After nodding to Qin Xingyan and the others to greet them, she found a seat on the sofa and sat down under Su Shenxing's signal. "First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Tantai Li. Someone from the Celestial Empire?" Su Shenxing was a little surprised. He had thought that the other party was from Fusong or Korea. "To be precise, I'm Chinese. My current nationality is Great Britain. It took me more than 3 months to learn Chinese." Tantai Li didn't seem to be good at joking. When she spoke, her expression didn't change at all. She always looked serious. To be honest, Su Shenxing had a hard time dealing with this type of person. "Now, can you tell me why you're here?" So Su Shenxing asked straightforwardly. "The people here are all trustworthy. If you trust me, just say it." "I heard from Mr. Xiao Jingyi that you are the guardian of your place, so I came to ask for your help." Tantai Li was silent for a moment, then she seemed to have made up her mind. She began to explain to Su Shenxing and the others. "Before that, I need to explain my identity. To be precise, I'm a member of Interpol's Supernatural Criminal Special Forces branch Cerberus. Regarding this, please keep it a secret with your assistant." "Hellhound?" Compared to Qin Xingyan, who specialized in the mythology of China, Chihaya Fukuyama, who was more involved in a broader field, immediately reacted. "To be precise, it's Hellhound." Tantai Li corrected. "I can guarantee that we won't reveal your identity unless it's necessary." Because keeping the other party's identity a secret was the premise of cooperation, and there was nothing worth revealing in this matter. Su Shenxing agreed and made a "please continue" gesture. Anyway, he also implied that they could reveal it under necessary circumstances, so it shouldn't matter. Maybe Tantai Li didn't understand the meaning in Su Shenxing's words, or maybe she understood it but didn't think it mattered, so she really continued. As the name suggests, the Cerberus branch is responsible for hunting down and imprisoning some vicious criminals who have a considerable degree of supernatural abilities and can't be sentenced to death for some reasons. Is there such a criminal? Su Shenxing was a little surprised. For him who used physical means to solve the enemy most of the time, he had almost never encountered such a criminal. For example, there is a criminal who uses supernatural means such as magic to load the concept of plague in an entire area into his body, giving him the ability to control the plague. If he is killed at this time, then the plague in his body will be amplified by all the karma effects caused by this ability due to the correction of the law of causality. Then it will be applied to that area again. The consequences can almost be the same as Chernobyl, instantly destroying all the humans in an area. Tantai Li didn't look like she was joking at all, and that kind of confident expression seemed to have already seen such a hellish scene. Chihaya Fukuyama couldn't help but shiver when he thought of that scene. "I see, I almost understand." Su Shenxing nodded. "Since you are here, then there is an 80% chance that someone has escaped from prison and you want me to help catch him, right? Yes, that's right. Tantai nodded. Sir is indeed the guardian of Jiangjin. You are unexpectedly astute. No, generally speaking, I can only think of this situation, right? Su Xinxing ridiculed in his heart. Even though that was the case, if there really was a vicious person who came to Jiangjin, he would definitely have to confront the other party sooner or later. Thinking about it this way, it would not be a bad thing to deal with it as soon as possible to minimize the impact. Then can you explain to me the appearance and specific abilities of the criminal who ran here? The other party's appearance is an ordinary Asian male. He is about 180 centimeters tall and has a medium physique. He has the ability to cast spells and knows a lot of different kinds of spells. Almost all the spells are like an extension of his arm, and he is very proficient in them. Tantai Li's expression was very solemn. But this is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that the guy has an immortal body. Immortal body? How is that possible? Su Xinxing curled his lips to express his disbelief. It was not that he had not encountered enemies with super-fast self-healing. That kind of enemy seemed to have an immortal body, and it was useless no matter how they were killed. Even if they were crushed into ashes, they could still regenerate from the cellular level. Unfortunately, this level of immortality was not Su Xinxing's match at all. He could basically wipe them out with one sword. There was no self-healing ability that could not be solved by turning the enemy into molecules. If that did not work, then turn them into atoms. Unfortunately, it's true. We've done many experiments and used many methods, but we still couldn't kill it. Our team leader even dragged out a missile, but it still didn't have any effect. In the end, it even seized the opportunity to kill one of my colleagues and escape. Speaking of this, Tantai Li's expression changed slightly. It seemed that she had a good relationship with that colleague. Chapter 241. I have a question. After hearing her words, Su Xinxing didn't continue to dwell on the issue of the immortal body. Anyway, when he encountered that guy, he would know if the other party was really immortal as long as he tried. He asked, "Since he is such a dangerous enemy, why are you the only one who came out to hunt him down?" He was proficient in many spells and had an immortal body. Since he was being hunted down, it meant that the other party's character was different from Su Xinxing, who could live a peaceful life. He was probably quite dangerous. Since that was the case, then it was too unreasonable for Tantai Li to pursue such an enemy alone, right? Regarding this, although it's not something worth announcing everywhere. In fact, the entire world is now in a state of high incidence of abnormal events. I'm afraid that even some sensitive, ordinary people have noticed that something is wrong. Now, we have tried our best to cover up those supernatural events. We really don't have extra manpower to hunt down fugitives. Tantai Li seemed to have known that Su Xinxing would ask about this, so she answered calmly. Although he didn't know if what she said was true or false, Su Xinxing also had some experience about the high incidence of abnormal events. It had been almost 3 years since he returned to Earth as the savior of the alternate world. The first 2 years were almost uneventful. Even the last year was because of Su Xinxing's own decision to go to Centaurus to fight a space war to adjust his ordinary life. But recently, all kinds of messy things kept popping up, and Su Xinxing didn't even have a chance to catch his breath. Although he could still survive even if he didn't gasp for breath. In short, even if the mutation of Jiangjin's spirit meridians aside, there had been a lot of strange things happening recently. Fortunately, after communication, the government departments of most countries agreed to let us seek help from some local people with special abilities. They can even lend us some official supernatural abilities. It was precisely because of this that I appeared at Mr. Xiao Jingyi's place. Tantai Li continued after seeing that Su Xinxing didn't continue to ask questions. Do you have more detailed information about the target we are hunting this time? Su Xinxing thought about it for a while before asking. For example, what's so special about that guy's appearance, what crime he committed, and some of his life's history? Of course. Tantai Li nodded and was silent for a moment. She seemed to be sorting out the information of the criminal in her mind. Then she slowly said, "First of all, we don't know when this guy was born. But since we noticed him here, He had left a record of nearly 400 years in history. As far as we know, around 1710, that guy was active in Europe as Count Saint-Germain. Count Saint-Germain? I feel that this name is subtly familiar. Su Shinxing touched his chin and thought for a moment, but he couldn't remember anyone with this name. On the other hand, Chiyo Yamanaka, who was also thinking, had her eyes lit up not long after. I remember. In the urban legends about time travelers that were popular in Japan, there was this Count Saint-Germain. He was the most likely person to be a time traveler along with John Tito and Andrew Carlson. Hearing Chihaya Fukuyama's words, Su Shinxing also remembered that he seemed to have watched a similar TV program with Mo Li a long time ago. Time traveler? But unfortunately, he is not such an existence. Tantai Li seemed to have heard of this for the first time. She shook her head and said, if he really had the ability to travel in time, we wouldn't have been able to catch him in the first place. What about the crime? What crime did that guy commit? Su Shinxing continued to ask. Although there seemed to be organizations that directly arrested all people with supernatural abilities without asking any questions, most of the organizations now still followed the rules. This was because those organizations that randomly arrested people had angered the public and were overthrown by the supernatural existences. Then, according to the principle of natural selection, this kind of organization became extinct, endangering the stability of space. Tantai Li's words made the corner of Su Shinxing's mouth twitch. He stole the magic book that could summon demons and then transformed it into a powerful magic device that could cause great damage to space. The disappearance of the Aurora Archipelago in modern times was due to the activation of that magic book. It was not until 1822 that one of the predecessors of the Cerberus organization caught him in Austria and imprisoned him. Wait a minute, you're saying that you have imprisoned that guy for nearly 200 years? Yes, because the runic prison that our organization inherited also came from the predecessor of the organization. There are many ancient super-criminals locked up in it. Tantai Li nodded. Su Shinxing rubbed his forehead with a headache. After being crazily imprisoned for so many years and being dragged out from time to test whether he could be killed humanely or inhumanely, it would not be strange to say that Saint-Germain was so anti-human that he wanted to destroy the whole world. Su Shinxing was not surprised at all. It would be better to say that after being tortured for 200 years and escaping from the prison, he had not caused any big news until now. This was already considered restraint. To be honest, if he had to confront a vicious criminal face-to-face, Su Shinxing would not be afraid at all. It was better to say that this was the best as it was easy and convenient to solve. However, if he had to deal with a criminal who hid in the shadows and only attacked ordinary people to vent his twisted resentment, Su Shinxing was a little troubled because he was not good at perception and reasoning. This could be seen from how he took so long to catch a thief. Even if he could catch the other party, it was difficult to predict the future and stop the damage caused by the other party. Then, do you have any clues now? Su Shinxing decided to eat an orange to calm himself down, so he peeled it and asked almost without any hope. A little. Unexpectedly, Tantai Li nodded. Saint-Germain seems to have a special interest in space spells and supernatural items. The fact that he appeared and stayed in this city also means that there are such things in this city. In this way, as long as we can find that thing first, we should be able to wait for him to come. The treasures in Jiangjin that could affect space. Speaking of which, Su Shinxing's Holy Sword of the End was the strongest in this aspect. Even an ordinary person, as long as they were recognized by it, could easily cut a world into pieces. It was much more difficult to control Roland's destructive power than to increase it. However, Su Shinxing believed that even if all the gods and Buddhas in this world crowded into Jiangjin, they might not be able to detect the slightest trace of the Holy Sword's aura on him, let alone Saint-Germain. Thinking of this, Su Shinxing suddenly raised his head and asked Qin Xingyan, who did not speak much because he did not understand the situation, mainly because he did not know who Saint-Germain was. Xingyan, can that weapon called Ghost Blade break space? Chapter 242. Qin Xingyan was taken aback when he heard this. Then he said uncertainly, I only heard that it can cut the soul. As for whether it can affect space, I really don't know. But here in the Celestial Empire, the artifact chooses its owner. Unless the user purely crushes the artifact in terms of spirit, otherwise it is basically impossible to use it. At least I haven't heard of a precedent of a Westerner being able to use an Eastern artifact. I seem to have said it just now, right? Although Sang Sherman used a Westerner's name, his appearance is a typical Asian. And based on his historical performance of possibly coming from a civilization with a long history, the possibility of the other party being from the ancient Celestial Empire is not small. Tantai Li retorted methodically. Speaking of ancient Asian civilizations, in addition to the Celestial Empire, there is also India, right? Su Xinqing asked curiously. No, that guy's face shape is obviously a mix of Southeast Asian and Mongolian Aryans. He has nothing to do with the mainstream race of ancient India, Dravidian.
Tantai, Li continued.
Su Xinqing thought for a while, but he still couldn't figure out what the Dravidian in the other party's words was, so he wisely decided not to pursue this point. But in this day and age, international police have to study race first. It seems that it is really difficult to make a living. In any case, in short, Su Xinqing still understood one thing: Sang Sherman was obviously the most suspicious person who stole the ghost blade. Okay, then in addition to this, do you have any information about the prisoner? After going through the whole thing in his mind, Su Xinqing asked calmly. This could be said to be the core problem. If the other party didn't have the slightest intention of showing up, then Su Xinqing could do almost nothing except unlock Mo Li's deep seal and close the door again to release Mo Li. The advantage of doing this was that Mo Li, who unlocked the seal, could definitely easily find the prisoner. The disadvantage was that Mo Li, who was in an unstable state, might evaporate the entire solar system if he wasn't careful. Su Xinqing pondered for a moment and felt that he didn't have much confidence that he would be able to discover Jasmine's power in time when she went berserk. It was possible that by the time he stopped Jasmine, Overlord would have already suffered a tragic defeat. Even Su Xinqing didn't think that he could swim all the way to Centaurus by breaststroke in space.
So it was better to postpone this method for the time being.
Well, if the premise is that the guy has stolen the treasure he wants, then according to the organization's records, his next step should be to find a place to start testing the terrifying power that can destroy space. Tantai Li's, as she seemed to recall the previous record of the guy Sang Sherman. Are there any signs of spatial destruction? Su Xinqing asked abruptly. Although he would occasionally cause damage to the world itself because he took out the holy sword of the end, Rolander, and even the principle of teleportation was to achieve the purpose of moving by cutting open space, he had a bunch of miscellaneous protection on him that could minimize the impact of this action on the world. Unless it caused the space to collapse or the world to shake on the spot, there would be almost no sequelae. At most, it would make the world wall slightly weaker. This was the main reason why no one had ever tried to catch him. It was precisely because of this that Su Xinqing didn't know the extent of the impact of space destruction under normal circumstances. Mr. Su, do you know about the Tunguska explosion? Tantai Li raised a chestnut. That was actually the aftermath of the damage caused by the destruction of space. But the transmission of information in that era was not convenient, so it was much easier to manipulate public opinion than now. It didn't cause too much panic. Tantai Li sounded a little envious. Because the Tunguska explosion was too famous, even Qin Xingyan, who had a "I don't understand what you're talking about" expression from the beginning, showed a happy expression. He couldn't help but say to Chihaya Fukuyama beside her, "I know about that too. I've seen it on TV." Or something. Su Xinqing had naturally heard of the Tunguska explosion. In fact, before he transmigrated to the other world, he was a guy who liked to read some strange literature such as The Unsolved Mysteries of the World, Unraveling the Fog of History, Frightening Mysteries, and so on. According to what Su Xinqing knew, the Tunguska explosion burned almost 2,000 square kilometers of land. Its power was equivalent to 20 million tons of TNT, or the extent of his forehead when he was serious. From the perspective of an ordinary person, it was indeed a very terrifying disaster. According to Tantai Li, if the guy called Sang Sherman could really transform the ghost blade into a space weapon, then a similar disaster might happen in Zhongjin. After figuring this out, even if Su Xinqing wanted to wash his hands of it, he couldn't do anything. So what should he do next? Su Shinxing held his chin with both hands and continued to make the signature gesture of a commander as he pondered. Should he unseal Immerse and take a look? Maybe unsealing him to the second stage would be enough? But even if it was the second stage Immerse, although he couldn't kill the solar system, he could still cause the extinction of an entire race or make the Earth suffer. Between the Tunguska explosion and the Earth explosion, the latter was obviously more dangerous, right? Just as Su Shinxing was still thinking hard, the doorbell of Sakura's apartment rang again. Who is it this time? I'm so busy today. Before Su Shinxing could stand up, Chihaya Fukuyama jumped up from her chair and successfully got rid of the chattering Qin Xingyan. She ran to the entrance and said, "I'll open the door." But not long after, Chihaya Fukuyama's scream came from the door. Su Shinxing frowned and appeared in the hallway in a flash. Tantai Li, who saw this, had a hopeful look in her eyes. When Su Shinxing rushed to the door, he found that Chihaya Fukuyama was fine, but someone was hugging her tightly. "So, it's you." Su Shinxing breathed a sigh of relief when he saw this. As if realizing that there was someone else here, the man who hugged Shinshan Qianzhao was startled. He let go of the girl's body and staggered back 2 steps before bowing slightly to Su Shinxing. "Long time no see, Mr. God. I already said that I'm not a god. Since I've left Japan's shrine, just treat me as an ordinary friend." Su Shinxing sighed. Then he smiled and said, "In short, welcome back, Asahi." "I'm back, God." Mr. Su and Chihaya. Asahi Sakura Kanji also responded with a beautiful smile. Chapter 243. People from Guifang would not die. This eternal life was the blessing that Hutu, who had established the 6 paths of reincarnation, gave to her people, but it was also the curse of that ominous land. They would be injured and bleed, but they would not die no matter what. Even if they were chopped into minced meat or burned to ashes, their bodies would gradually return to their original state. It was as if time was flowing backward. Furthermore, as a part of the eternal curse, no new life would be born in the Guifang land. This was the cursed land Guifang, which was located in the gap of reincarnation and was independent of the world. No one would die, and no one would be born. In the beginning, the people of Guifang were wild with joy for their eternal life and were grateful to Goddess Hutu from the bottom of their hearts. But as time passed, this eternity became the strongest poison. Thousands of years were enough for the people of Guifang to understand all the corners of this land and become proficient in all the spells passed down from their ancestors. But other than that, they could not do anything else. Being able to live without eating also meant that they did not have the ability to enjoy delicious food. The animals in Guifang were the same as the people there, having eternal life. This point completely eliminated the possibility of hunting as a form of entertainment. At the same time, no matter how interesting a game was, it would become boring after playing it a few million times. Because of the narrowness of the world and the imperfection of the world's laws, it was impossible to develop any decent scientific civilization on that small, barren land. The people of Guifang seemed to be imprisoned in an eternal cage. They could only use their endless lives to experience the unbearable torture of boredom. They were not even allowed to understand their long lives. Many people could not stand this torture and gradually went crazy. But that endless time could even wear away a person's madness. After everything calmed down, what was left was only the lifeless and heavy despair that made people unable to resist. Until one day, an accident allowed a person of Guifang to escape from this cursed land. Full of joy, he thought that he had finally escaped the curse. After playing in this new world, he could sleep underground like ordinary people. But after several hundred years had passed, reality once again made him realize that the curse from the Ghostcraft grounds had not disappeared. Instead, it followed him like a shadow. Even if he came to the outside world, he was still unable to get rid of it. Fortunately, the outside world was not as closed off as the Guifang. Although the great wilderness world had already been destroyed, there were still many dusty ancient ruins and taboo knowledge left behind in different spacetimes. After a long investigation, he finally confirmed that there was only one way to remove this curse: to pull the land of the Guifang back to this world from the gap of the 6 paths of reincarnation and let it return to the cycle of reincarnation. Only in this way could the people of the Guifang be saved and the curse of Hu to be removed. However, for this world, especially for the practitioners on Earth, this was not a good thing. Even if the world of the Guifang was much smaller than the Great Wilderness world, and its total area was not even as big as the moon, the collision of the two worlds would always cause a great impact. Moreover, this impact almost always appeared in the form of disasters. In the past, even if he merely tried to connect with the land of the Guifang, it would cause a terrifying explosion that flattened half a mountain. Because of this, he even attracted the pursuit and interception of human spellcasters. In the end, he was captured and imprisoned in the world's most mysterious and sturdy cage, the runic prison. However, compared to the despairing land of the Guifang, this kind of prison created by humans by capturing space fragments was really child's play. It only took him 100 years to seize the opportunity to kill a prison guard and successfully escape. This era was very different from the past. The outside world was full of things that he could not understand. It was similar to the feeling he had when he first escaped from the land of the Guifang and came to the outside world. However, this time, he no longer had the mood to understand the outside world like before. From the beginning to the end, there was only one thing he wanted to do, and that was to complete what he could not do in the past, which was to once again pull the land of the Guifang into this world, so that Huda's curse on that land could be lifted. A deep obsession occupied his body and mind, and made him start to use this as a goal to carry out high-speed and efficient actions. After trying his best to escape from the range of activities of those prison guards, he began to build an altar that could help him pull the land of the Guifang into this world. Thousands of years had made him one of the best spell masters in the world. The hundreds of years in the runic prison had also given him the time to summarize and organize these thoughts and carry out a complete plan. Therefore, even if it was something that ordinary practitioners could not do, ordinary practitioners could not discover and touch the land of the Guifang, he could prepare and complete it in just a short year. There was only one problem left. He needed a treasure related to space and with great power as a primer to open the entire space-time spell. Back then, he had used a copy of Solomon's grimoire as a primer, but the effect was not very good. In the Tunguska explosion, the grimoire that was said to be unbreakable even by the holy sword blessed by the church was blown to ashes. This was also one of the main reasons why he failed to draw the land of the Guifang at that time. By the way, another reason was that 2 days before casting the spell, when he was modifying the grimoire, he had accidentally summoned a demon god and consumed a lot of physical strength, causing the Tunguska explosion to directly blow him to the ground. Unlike the era when he was sealed, the spiritual energy in this era seemed to be much thinner, and even those supernatural existences had become very rare. Naturally, a space treasure that could be used as a primer had also become very rare. He, who was once all-powerful in the circle of European aristocrats, even had to run to the antique street by the Airlie Bridge to pick up scraps in order to find useful treasures, and was king cheated of a few $100. Fortunately, not long after, he found an excellent treasure. It was the bronze sword that he had accidentally lost when he escaped from the Guifang. It was just that the treasure was protected very tightly. Although it looked like a dilapidated apartment, he could not break into it even if he used all his skills. The invisible wall outside was even more solid than the runic prison. In the end, when he was at his wit's end, he accidentally found a young girl who could freely enter and leave it. Thus, he had a flash of inspiration, and through the 18 transformations passed down from the prehistoric era, he turned into a fly and quietly landed on the young girl's clothes, and only then did he successfully find his bronze sword. This bronze sword had been nurtured by him in the land of the Guifang for thousands of years, and had long possessed great power. But this was not the main point. The main point was that this thing had passed through the gap of reincarnation with him, and had come to the outside world from the land of the Guifang. Naturally, it also possessed a certain degree of space power. Without a doubt, This was the best medium to draw the land of the Guifeng. Tonight, it's time to solve the eternal curse of the land of the Guifeng. Sang Sherman, or rather, the resident from the Guifeng who had long forgotten his name, looked at the setting sun that gradually sank into the horizon and said in a low voice with surging emotions. Chapter 244. Since the spell that led Guifeng to this world was a super-standard ritual spell that could only be established with the help of astrology, and, according to the classification, it was closer to the Western black magic than the Eastern tactics. Therefore, Sang Sherman had to wait for the moon to reach the right position. However, at this moment, a voice came from not far behind him. "Unfortunately, Mr. Sang Sherman, I'm afraid your wish can't be fulfilled." Sang Sherman's breath stagnated. However, he was an old monster who had lived for thousands of years, so he did not show any surprise on his face. He just slowly turned around. Tantai Li, his old rival who had chased him for most of the world, and a few unfamiliar guys who were probably local sorcerers slowly approached him from behind. To be honest, if it were not for Tantai Li's mysterious runic prison, Sang Sherman really did not care about the strength of this young sorcerer. It should be noted that Sang Sherman was a member of the Cerberus organization. He was one of the most dangerous terrorists among the crime bosses. So far, no one knew how many people died in the Tunguska explosion. And this was under the circumstance that the explosion happened in the wild. Although some people thought that he must have weakened a lot in his hundreds of years of captivity, judging from the fact that Cerberus and even the entire secret police organization only sent Tantai Li, who had the ability to detain him, to act alone, he was probably still regarded as extremely dangerous. Even if they arranged for Tantai Li to stop him, it would only increase the casualties without any means to restrain him. Tantai Li was also very clear about this. Therefore, when she asked for help from various supernatural organizations, she basically only asked them to help her find Sang Sherman. She alone was enough to arrest that fellow. This way, regardless of whether the arrest was successful or not, she could at least reduce the number of casualties to a minimum, but this time was different from the past. Other figures appeared around Tantai Li. "You brought others this time. Don't tell me you think that after reaching my level of strength, you can rely on numbers to change the situation of the battle? Doing so will only make those people around you die meaninglessly in my hands." Sang Sherman's voice sounded a little low and hoarse. He stared at Tantai Li coldly. "I thought you were a very wise guy. Now it seems that you are just SFO." He did have the right to be proud. After all, as an old monster who had lived for so long, he had basically mastered more spells than anyone in this world. Moreover, he did not master them in a rush. He had completely grasped those spells through a long period of practice, research, and study. At least in this era, he thought that no one could surpass him in understanding the essence of spells. Now, unless there was a powerful and little-known artifact, spells, or a unique sealing method like runic prison, he could do whatever he wanted in this world. Tantai Li pursed her lips tightly. Although Xiao Jingyi patted his chest in the super administrative office's office and guaranteed that this matter would be handled by Su Xinqing, she was still very worried. After all, Sang Sherman was a completely different level of opponent from the ordinary supernatural criminals. Moreover, in Tantai Li's opinion, Director Xiao Jingyi seemed to be just an ordinary person with a little psionic power and almost no supernatural powers. It was not rare for ordinary people to be the chief of a supernatural organization in other countries. However, it was easy for an outsider to lead an expert. It was easy to misjudge a lot of information and cause huge losses. After all, many times, you could not expect an outsider to know which was more difficult to deal with, a great magician who had entered the extraordinary realm or a cultivator who had entered the golden core realm. But I'm very curious. How did you find me here? I've already erased my aura. Sang Sherman looked at Tantai Li with an interested look and asked. However, the person who answered him was not the girl who had chased him half the world, but the young man with a subtle hairline beside her. Of course it's through surveillance, idiot. Su Xinqing mocked mercilessly. It was quite a coincidence. Asahi Sakura Kanji had rushed back from Japan after participating in a festival that she called the Holy War. In the end, Su Xinxing inadvertently asked Asahi about a suspicious person who was carrying a long bag on her way here. What happened next was simple. After borrowing the surveillance footage from the police station, they easily found Sang Sherman, who was pretending to look at the scenery in the crowd as if nothing had happened. After this antique escaped from the runic prison, he did not care about how advanced the technology of ordinary people had become. He did not even know how to hide the fact that surveillance was everywhere. He was caught red-handed by Su Xinxing and the others. Is there anything else you want to ask? If it's just this question, I'm afraid it won't take long. Su Xinxing looked at Sang Sherman with a fake smile. He's stalling for time? Tan Tai Li was shocked and wanted to make a move, but she was stopped by Su Xinxing. Since you're not going to ask, then it's my turn to ask, he continued. What do you want to do? Don't you know that casually fiddling with fragile things like space will lead to a disaster if you're not careful? Sang Sherman, who was waiting for the moon to return to its original position, stopped posturing after hearing his question. Instead, after hesitating for a moment, he slowly told Su Xinxing about his past and the curse of Guifeng. Anyway, he was stalling for time anyway. It did not matter what method he used. What was important was the result. After listening to Sang Sherman's story, Su Xinxing nodded. Simply put, an undocumented person forcibly broke into an ordinary person's house and settled down in order to get a household register. Although it's more or less like that, Senior, your way of saying it feels weird. Qin Xingyan complained with a strange expression. Tan Tai Li looked like she also wanted to complain, but she probably felt that once she complained, she would lose something important. So she endured it and continued to put on a poker face. It's okay, you'll get used to it. Su Xinxing laughed, then picked up a branch from the ground, pointed at Sang Sherman, and then made a baseball pose. Don't you just want to court death? No problem, I'll satisfy you. Chapter 245. Sigh, I've been busy all day for nothing. Xiao Zhengyi rubbed his sore shoulders as he walked out of the elevator. He didn't realize it when he was helping out Su Feng, but when he was in that position, he realized that there were a lot of messy things to do. More than half of them were related to the group of superhumans in Sakura apartment. No matter what, he should be able to get a good night's sleep when he got home. Recently, the group of monsters in the apartment had become much more well-behaved. Even the double bed, although only Xiao Zhengyi slept on it, didn't continue to whisper in his ear like a recorder after he fell asleep, saying things like, "We need to change the bedsheets tomorrow. We need the luxurious ones with golden rims," in an attempt to brainwash him. However, when he opened the apartment door, Xiao Zhengyi couldn't help but be shocked. The monsters in the apartment were all lying on the ground, as if they had been drained of all their energy. Those who didn't know the inside story would think that a tornado had just swept through the apartment, and it was the kind with a force of 12. What's wrong with you? Xiao Zhengyi took a closer look and found that they weren't pretending to be dead, but really seemed to have lost the ability to move. Thus, he asked the television, which was easier to communicate with on a daily basis. The television beeped weakly, and then automatically turned on. It was playing the 100 Families jar. A middle-aged man who looked like a storyteller slammed the desk and said loudly, "Tragic." Well, it was understandable that they were tragic, but what exactly happened? At this time, Xiao Zhengyi found that the fountain pen he forgot to bring today was lying on the stack of A4 printing paper beside the computer desk. There was a puddle of ink on the tip of the pen, and it looked like half a tube of ink. What made him even more speechless was that next to the fountain pen, there was a sentence written in trembling words that seemed to be written in blood. "The murderer is..." The latter half of the sentence stopped abruptly. So, who is the murderer? Don't be like a victim in a detective drama who died halfway through a sentence. The spiritual energy in this room is being sucked out from the window. The one who answered his question was the Yuan Rong sword spirit, who had been by his side all this while and had returned with him. Even demons like us can't completely lock down this spiritual energy. Before he finished speaking, Yuan Rong sword spirit's voice had already begun to sound a little strange and unreal. From the direction in which the spiritual energy is being sucked out, it's the sky. There's something in the sky. Xiao Zhengyi's face darkened. He quickly ran to the windowsill and opened it. Ignoring the wind that blew into the room, he looked in the direction Yuan Rong's sword spirit pointed. Then, his eyes widened as he looked at the sky in disbelief. His mouth opened, but he couldn't say anything. After a long while, he seemed to have suddenly regained the ability to speak and shouted in disbelief. What the hell is this? What was supposed to be the night sky was now a reflection of another world. This is digital world? Su Xinqing also looked at the sky in surprise. No matter how I look at it, it's the Guifang that guy was talking about, Qin Xingyan complained from the side. Because Su Xinqing didn't care, and because the author had been trying to make up the word count, Sang Sherman actually found a chance to delay the appearance of the Guifang until it appeared. No one would believe it even if it was a mirage. Chihaya Fukuyama was also speechless at the scene he saw for the first time. That space shouldn't have officially descended yet. It's just at the level where it interacts with the real world. Tantai Li's voice sounded a little nervous. Even though she was a warden of the Talisman prison and was used to seeing the world, she had never seen such a troublesome fugitive. Only people with a certain degree of supernatural ability can see that reflected world. No matter what you want to do now, it's already too late. The arrival of the Guifang is a foregone conclusion. Sang Sherman had completed his obsession. He seemed to have lost interest in how Su Xinqing and the others would treat him. He just looked at the land and the sky in a daze. Don't you know how terrible things will happen if another space smashes into this world? Tantai Li couldn't help but ask. The cause of the Tunguska explosion was caused by the failure of the Guifang's strange space traction. Now that the traction was successful, the entire Guifang world smashed down. The strange phenomenon caused by it would definitely be much larger than the one back then. Then what about the power of its explosion? It would probably be even larger than the Tunguska explosion. Maybe the entire land of Jiangjin would be blown away by the explosion. All man-made things would be blown away or turned into powder. No matter how strong the building was, it wouldn't be enough in the face of such a force of nature. Other than the group of superhumans in Sakura apartment and the people who had been protected by Su Xinqing, perhaps only the cockroaches could survive such a close explosion. I don't know. Sang Sherman replied without hesitation. What? Tantai Li was choked by the other party's answer, without any confusion. If no preparations are made, tens of thousands of people will die because of the sudden arrival of the disaster. After a while, she began to shout with righteous indignation, "If you still have a shred of conscience, stop this stupid thing immediately. I've already said that once it starts, it can't be stopped." Sang Sherman seemed to shake his head regretfully. "Although I'm sorry to have involved you, I'll soon be able to fulfill the long-cherished wish of everyone in the Guifang world that has lasted for thousands of years." Long-cherished wish. Su Xinqing frowned. Everything in the Guifang will decay after it re-enters the cycle of reincarnation. The curse of that land will also usher in its end. Everything will come to an end. Sang Sherman's expression looked a little fanatical. For an immortal who pursued death, there was indeed almost nothing in this world that could move his determination. However, his feverish expression suddenly froze. Su Xinqing, who had been acting like a baseball player from the beginning, finally swung the bat. This action was originally very stupid in Sang Sherman's eyes. The two worlds had just begun to interfere with each other. The physical distance could be said to be non-existent or infinite. What was the point of swinging the bat here? But the reality was unbelievable to him. In his perception, after the other party swung the bat, the interference between the Guifang world and the real world seemed to have become much lighter. Even from the reflection of the world above his head, it could be seen that it seemed to have become farther away from the ground. "Isn't this effective?" Su Xinqing grinned. "It's just a bigger stone. Watch me push it away." Chapter 246. Probably because he did not expect that Su Xinqing's seemingly simple act of foolishness was actually effective, Sang Sherman was even stunned for a long time before he came back to his senses. Then he roared and rushed towards Su Xinqing. Even he could not tolerate his painstaking efforts going down the drain. What's more, it was different from the surprise attack this time. If he was caught this time, after those who caught him knew his real purpose, it would be easy for them to take targeted actions to obstruct him. In this way, it would be very difficult for him to do what he did today. What's more, for some reason, the spiritual energy in this world seemed to be constantly draining away, becoming thinner and thinner. If he wasted another few hundred years like this, he might not even be able to gather the spiritual energy needed to reconnect with the Guifang. Hong Xiu. Seeing that Su Shenxing was pushing the Guifang out of this world and could not free himself for a while, Qin Xingyan immediately controlled his flying sword and flew toward Zhang Sherman. However, the other party was an old monster who had lived from the Desolate Age until today. What kind of scene had he not seen before? He even chatted and laughed with Empress Hoodoo, who established the 6 paths of reincarnation. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be stumped by a flying sword that was refined after the founding of the country. With just a casual wave of his hand, the flying sword Hong Xiu, which could easily cut through a steel plate that was tens of centimeters thick, was sent flying to the side by an invisible distance. Qin Xingyan, who had a connection with the flying sword, turned pale as if he had been struck by lightning and retreated a few steps. However, what Zhang Sherman did not expect was that there was another flying sword hidden in the shadow of Hong Xiu. Although he reacted quickly and flicked his finger almost in the blink of an eye, the flying sword with a pattern of 100 herbs was sent flying, but the sword left a green spot on his fingertip. With a thought, Zhang Sherman had already understood that this green spot actually contained a poison that had a miraculous effect on cultivators. What made him feel even more uneasy was that this poison was not fatal. After all, as a member of the Guifang who was immortal, he was least afraid of all kinds of things that could kill people, but it would slow down the reaction of the poisoned person. Zhang Sherman naturally knew how to circulate his energy to expel poison, but the current situation made it impossible for him to do so. Because the moment Qin Xingyan made his move, Chihaya Fukuyama also made his move. The surrounding air became much drier in an instant. All the water vapor was gathered together and turned into a mass of pure water, blocking in front of Zhang Sherman like a solid wall. Zhang Sherman, who could not dodge in time, slammed into the water ball. The water, which was supposed to be just an ordinary splash, suddenly became sticky like paste, making it difficult for him to break free. However, he did not panic at all. Instead, he released the magical power in his body. The mana that the people of Guifang had cultivated for thousands and thousands of years was enormous. In almost a breath's time, the water around his body was blasted away. However, the water ball was not Chihaya Fukuyama's strongest means from the beginning. Although the girl originally had the blood of the water god, after being expelled from Fusang, this divine power that was close to that of the earth god also weakened as she left her homeland. On the contrary, the power of the martial god that Su Shenxing gave her blossomed and became very powerful under the guidance of the earth god girl. Although the name of the god was still Su Shenxing, it could be said that Chihaya Fukuyama was already an out-and-out martial god's body. At this moment, the newly promoted martial god had already stimulated his own divine power and appeared in front of Zhang Sherman, who had struggled to break free from the water ball, and waved a fierce palm at him. If one took the palm of the martial god without knowing it, perhaps even a member of the Guifang would be blown away like a cannonball, with broken tendons and bones, unable to move for a long time. But Zhang Sherman calmed down a little after suffering a loss from Qin Xingyan and was no longer as manic as before. He keenly sensed the aura of a god from the girl's body. Because the land of the Guifang did not belong to the 6 paths of reincarnation, it was naturally not under the jurisdiction of the heaven realm. And the person who carried out the duties of the earth god in the Guifang back then was Goddess Hoodoo, who sent the Guifang into the 6 paths of reincarnation. Therefore, there was no godhead in the Guifang. No matter how the people of the Guifang cultivated, after exhausting all the spiritual energy in the Guifang, they would not be able to advance any further and could not be promoted to God through the godhead. But this did not mean that the people of the Guifang did not know what kind of power the gods had. Therefore, he lowered his body to avoid Chihaya Fukuyama's palm strike and then used Iron Mountain Lean to send the girl flying. He also left a restriction on the girl's abdomen where his shoulder hit, causing the girl to sink into the ground. Although this method could not kill a god, it could at least prevent her from continuing to participate in the battle for a short time. However, with the two girls' actions stalling for time, Tantai Li, one of the main characters, was also prepared. She pulled open her lapel, revealing her white jade-like chest and an unexpectedly cute pink bra. There was a dark red rune on her white chest. At this moment, the rune was surrounded by an ominous blood-red electric light. Open the door. With Tantai Li's chant, a dark purple vortex appeared behind her. It looked like a portal in many games. In fact, many Western-style full-body knight armor emerged from the vortex. Judging from the sound made when these armors moved, there was probably no one inside. It was all empty. This was why, as a member of Cerberus, she had the confidence to pursue a dangerous criminal like Sang Sherman alone. It was because of the existence of these supernatural jailers. Qin Xingyan and Chihaya Fukuyama worked together to delay Sang Sherman for less than 10 seconds, but at this moment, at least 20 to 30 jailers appeared on the field. Magic puppets, your methods still haven't changed at all. Sang Sherman snorted coldly, but he did not seem to have the intention to chat with Tantai Li. Without waiting for her answer, he rushed toward the knight armor again, or rather, Su Xinqing behind the armor. Capture. Tantai Li continued to chant in a low voice that sounded a little ethereal, or rather a little hollow. As a result, the originally lifeless armors immediately took action and launched an attack on Sang Sherman. However, almost half of those armors were destroyed by Sang Sherman in just one move. Sang Sherman, on the other hand, seemed to be able to foresee the movements of those armors. From the very beginning, he was able to easily move among the armors, and with a raise of his hand, the originally dense array of armors became sparse. Seeing that the armored jailers were about to be wiped out, Sang Sherman's movements froze in the next moment. Even if it was just a small mistake, the remaining armors seized the fleeting opportunity and gave up all actions. They only pounced on Sang Sherman in order to reduce his space of movement. Imprison. At this moment, Tantai Li also used her trump card. A crimson vortex appeared, but this time it emerged from above Sang Sherman's head. That just now was it a curse? Sang Sherman said coldly. Your actions are all within my calculations. Since you can kill my companions, it means that you know all about our abilities. Therefore, if I want to capture you, I need some other methods. Tantai Li did not answer directly, but what she said was no different from admitting it. The next moment, the crimson vortex swallowed Sang Sherman. Just when she thought everything was over, she received a heavy blow to her abdomen. She spat out acid and knelt on the ground, almost losing the ability to move. How is it possible? Although she only saw it from the corner of her eye, she was sure that the one who suddenly appeared and attacked her was undoubtedly Sang Sherman. Nonsense. Do you think I'm stupid enough to think that you, who dared to come out to capture me, don't have any new tricks? The other party sneered and continued to run towards Su Xinqing. It was unknown whether it was because he disdained to deal the final blow or because he did not have the time. Sang Sherman felt his heart beat faster. The man who used a treasure that looked like a branch to push away the Guifang's land was looking up at the sky, seemingly unaware of what was happening here. Now, as long as he could succeed in a sneak attack and take away the Tree of Seven Wonders or other artifacts of a similar level, the other party should not have any means to continue to push away the Guifang's land. His long-cherished wish for so many years could finally be fulfilled. But just when he was about to touch the other party, a figure suddenly appeared between him and the man opposite him and sent him flying with a punch. His spine seemed to be broken into two, and a few of his ribs seemed to be broken. Most of his internal organs were probably moved to other places. What kind of person could cause such an effect with a punch? After all, the people of the Guifang had practiced for so many years, and their physical strength was far stronger than steel. At first, Sang Sherman thought that the martial god girl had broken free from her earth restriction and returned here to obstruct him. But soon, he found that he was wrong. What appeared in front of him was a little girl with double ponytails who looked less than 10 years old. She was wearing a very simple white dress and a small vest jacket that was slightly bigger than her petite body. She looked very cute. Even in his thousands or even tens of thousands of years of life, he had not seen many women who could be compared to this little girl. Even if the other party was less than 10 years old, the word beauty and hope for the future was no longer enough to describe her. In fact, most of the so-called beauties in the world could only feel ashamed of their inferiority in front of her. At this moment, the little girl was looking at him coldly. "You're not allowed to touch the landlord." Chapter 247. Sang Sherman could not help but want to curse when his attacks were thwarted one after another. As an old monster who had lived for tens of thousands of years, the number of people in this world who could exchange blows with him could be counted on 2 hands. Even Tantai Li, who had chased him all the way, if she didn't have something like the runic prison that could imprison him again, he wouldn't take her seriously. However, he did not expect that the first fight after coming to the Celestial Empire would be so sullen. Not to mention in this era, where spiritual energy was thin, even hundreds of years ago, when spiritual energy was still considered abundant, they could be called strong characters. However, they actually came together and even accidentally took the powerful punch of the golden-haired little girl in the end, causing him to be seriously injured. Who are you?" Sang Sherman asked hatefully. "Since you asked so sincerely, I'll be merciful and answer you." Emily stared at him and slowly replied, "Omit." "Don't omit. Isn't this equivalent to not answering anything?" Although he wanted to complain, Sang Sherman knew that now was not the time to do such a thing. He casually created an ice blade and then stabbed it into the back of his head with practiced movements. If it was an ordinary person, the ice blade would have killed him directly when it pierced into the back of his head, but Sang Sherman was from the Guifang, and he was immortal. So, in the next moment, he returned to the state of being alive, and even the terrible injuries on his body disappeared. This was the performance of the immortal mechanism of the Guifang. If it was just an injury, although the recovery speed was much faster than ordinary people, it would still take a certain amount of time. But if it was death, then in the next moment, they would be resurrected in a normal state. So for Sang Sherman from the Guifang, piercing the ice blade into his head to create a hole in his head was not self-harm, but simply the fastest and most convenient way to recover from the injury that caused him to be unable to move for a short period of time. "Little girl, let me give you one last piece of advice. It's better to obediently step aside." He looked at Emily, who was still standing in front of him, and said coldly, "It's a nostalgic feeling." However, Emily remained unmoved. Instead, he adopted a stance that seemed to have come out of a certain manga and was full of flaws. "I haven't been treated as the last boss in a long time." Seeing that the other party did not accept his kind reminder, Sang Sherman finally attacked again. Almost instantaneously, he appeared in front of Emily and sent a knee strike at Emily. Based on Emily's height, if this knee strike landed, it would probably hit the girl's little face. "Oh, I see it." At the same time, Emily shouted, and his body moved accordingly. Then she was sent flying by Sang Sherman's kick. He didn't see anything at all. In the distance, Qin Xingyan, who had finally regained some of his energy, complained in his heart. Even Sang Sherman did not expect that Emily, who looked like the final boss, would be sent flying by a kick so easily. He could not help but be stunned. Just when he remembered that he had to chase after Emily, he was surprised to find that he had lost control of his body. It was not that his body was being controlled, or that he had been hit by some kind of spell. Instead, it was something even more unbelievable. His body had lost the ability to move due to fear. "Emily, are you okay?" The young man, who was the source of his fear, was carrying Emily, who was lying face down on the ground. He patted the dust off the girl's skirt and asked with concern. The kick that could even dent a piece of metal didn't cause the girl the slightest bit of damage. It looked like Jasmine was simply startled. However, even this kind of attack could not be avoided. It seemed that the deep seal had quite a big effect on Emily. Sang Sherman, who was standing on the side, bit his tongue hard and used the pain to get rid of the fear. He looked at Su Xinxing with a complicated expression. Since the young man could move freely, it meant that his plan had completely failed, and that was the truth. If he looked up now, he could no longer see the digital reflection in the sky. The land of Guifang. There was only a tranquil bright moon hanging high in the dark night sky. Although the Tunguska explosion has nothing to do with me, and I'm not interested in the International Police's arrest warrant, Su Xinxing raised his head and looked at Sang Sherman. This action caused the latter to be gripped by fear again. His whole body trembled involuntarily, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. But not only did you make a scene in my territory, you also beat up my tenant. Boy, you're brave. It took all of Sang Sherman's strength to not let his weak legs fall to the ground. He could not attack or escape at all. Don't worry, I'll teach you a lesson without killing you. Su Xinxing put Emily, who was confirmed to be fine, on the ground, then clenched his fists and walked towards Sang Sherman. The next scene was too cruel, so I won't describe it for the time being. 10 minutes later, Su Xinxing dug out Chihaya Fukuyama, who had sunk into the ground. As soon as the girl appeared, she burst into tears. Putting aside the sand and soil that poured into my nose, the feeling of the earthworms in the soil and the underground pipeline passing through my body is really disgusting. It's all the fault of the land. Therefore, Su Xinxing also echoed. Far away in the mountains behind Jiangjin University, the land god lowly sneezed. On the other side, Qin Xingyan had healed Tantai Li with his flying sword, Bai Chao. Emily, who was unscathed, had already found an opportunity to sneak home to play games. A little farther away from the crowd, Sang Sherman, who had few complete bones in his body, was twitching intermittently. His fingers were still trembling slightly, and the magic power in his body was slowly flowing. He seemed to be planning to use another suicide recovery spell to heal his injuries. I advise you not to use suicide to heal yourself again. Su Xinxing, who had finally appeased Chihaya Fukuyama and noticed this, said, because this time, you might not be able to come back to life. Why? Do you say that? Sang Sherman's head moved and asked in an inaudible voice. I was thinking that if I threw the Guifang back to the Six Paths Gap, such a mess might happen in the future. But from my point of view, it's not good to let them come to Earth. Su Xinxing looked at Sang Sherman and replied softly, so, I threw your hometown to the moon. Anyway, with the magic power of your hometown's residents, it shouldn't be difficult to live on the moon, right? Sang Sherman's face revealed a look of surprise. Without the protection of Hutu, your people will soon grow old and die, but... Su Xinxing looked up at the beautiful moonlight. Through some special blessings that he learned during the Centaurus battle, his vision was comparable to, or even better than most super astronomical telescopes. He could even see places that ordinary telescopes could not see. Compared to this end, it's also a new beginning for some things. At this moment, in his eyes, most of the native plants on the barren land thrown to the back of the moon had turned into ashes because of the disappearance of Huda's curse. However, in the ashes that filled the sky, a small, emerald green shoot that originated from the prehistoric times broke out of the ground and became the first new life in the land of the Guifang in thousands of years. Chapter 248. So this kind of thing actually happened. In an apartment, after listening to Su Xinxing's brief description of what happened yesterday, Xiao Jingyi drank a can of Coke, self-brought, and then sighed deeply. Can you inform me in advance when you carry out such activities in the future? To be honest, when I looked up and saw the reflection of the world in the sky last night, I was really scared. After all, he was just an ordinary person a few months ago. Speaking of which, Xiaoqing, didn't you notice it yesterday? With that said, Xiao Jingyi asked the assistant girl next to him. Since Su Feng and Xinju left Jiangjin, and Xiao Jingyi was promoted to the director of Jiangjin's super administrative office, the super administrative office officially became a small broken department with only 2 people. Feng Xiaoqing was naturally promoted from an errand runner to his assistant. That needs to be seen by people with inspiration. Feng Xiaoqing smiled embarrassedly. I don't have any inspiration, and I'm used to sleeping naked. I usually don't wear a necklace when sleeping, so I didn't notice it at all. Wait a minute, I think I just heard a very exciting word. Compared to that, Su Shenxing looked at Xiao Jingyi, whose eyes were shining, and put the teacup in his hand on the table. If there is nothing else, you can leave now, right? Wow, you actually want to drive people away without mercy. Nonsense, do you want me to invite you to stay for lunch? Su Shenxing said with a sidelong glance. Speaking of which, I have a few tickets to the beach in the neighboring city as a benefit. Do you want to go together? Xiao Jingyi didn't take Su Shenxing's eviction order to heart. Instead, he asked, it's probably because the bureau chief and the others were still around when this thing was distributed, so their share was also distributed this time. Forget it, a poor little civilian like me who still needs to work is different from you government lackeys. I don't have so much money in my hands to eat, drink, and play. Oh, the ticket includes a night's stay at the Seaside Hotel and 3 meals at the Sea House Hotel. In other words, except for souvenirs, you don't need to pay for it at all. Woof woof woof. How shameless can you be? Xiao Jingyi's mouth twitched. Let me explain in advance. I only have 2 extra tickets here. You can't bring such a big family with you. Xiao Jingyi, I'm so disappointed in you. Su Shenxing's face suddenly drooped. Mr. Yang. Jasmine chimed in from the side. Ahem, what nonsense did you teach the little? Xiao Jingyi, who choked on the cola for a moment, felt that it was really a mistake to invite Su Shenxing. If you want to go to the beach to play, Chaori and I will stay behind to look after the house. Chihaya Fukuyama on the side took advantage of the gap between chatting and said to Su Shenxing, she and I both came from Japan. Beaches and whatnot are not rare there. To be honest, I'm not very interested. You can go and have fun by yourselves. Asahi Sakura Kanji on the side also hurriedly nodded to show that Chihaya Fukuyama was right. Thus, Su Shenxing looked at Qin Xingyan. Then I'll also. Qin Xingyan was just about to say that he would stay at Sakura apartment with Chihaya Fukuyama when he was interrupted by Su Shenxing. It's been hard for you to run around recently. How about you come with us? Hearing what he said, the girl didn't hesitate and smiled. That's fine. I can pay for myself. Senior Su, you can bring Emily with you. That's right. Speaking of which, this girl who had the Bailu Temple as her backer was also an invisible dog rich. Actually, you don't have to rush. There are still 2 weeks before the tickets are available. Xiao Jingyi took out 2 crumpled tickets from his pocket and handed them to Su Shenxing. Let me know when you want to go. I have to talk to the hotel over there and book a room in advance. It'll be autumn in 2 weeks. Su Shenxing didn't mind and took the tickets. We'll go this weekend at the latest. But then again, if we go together, will Jiang Jin be safe? Qin Xingyan asked uneasily. She wasn't worried about Jiang Jin's public safety. No matter how much trouble an ordinary person caused, the most they could do was smash a bank escort van. Instead, she was worried about whether or not any supernatural incidents would occur in Jiangjin. Although the suppressing Chuan seal had alleviated the high incidence of supernatural incidents in Jiangjin, it didn't mean that they could sit back and relax. What happened yesterday had caused the girl's nerves to be tense. She hadn't relaxed even now. Ever since she lost the Ghost Fong strike, she had been a little nervous. This was also one of the reasons why Su Shenxing wanted the girl to go with him to rest. It's fine. The neighboring city isn't far from Jiangjin. Even if we take the tram, we'll be there in at most half an hour. If something really happens, we don't have to worry about not being able to make it. Xiao Jingyi patted his chest and promised. Not only that, the tram wasn't the fastest way for this group of people to travel. Whether it was Qin Xingyan's flying sword or Su Shenxing's ordinary people's high-speed train, they could travel from the neighboring city to Jiangjin in a few minutes. Moreover, I'm still in Jiangjin. If something really happens, as long as I can contact Earth Teacher, even if I can't solve it, I should be able to hold on until you guys come back. Chihaya Fukuyama also said that he could stay in Jiangjin. If he couldn't, there was still the 1,000-year-old ghost Earth Loli. With 2 gods keeping an eye on a city, it would be considered a special treatment if it was placed in other places. With this thought, Qin Xingyan didn't continue to worry about it. For the sake of the beach, it's fine if you guys stay for dinner this time. Su Shenxing waved his hand and pretended to be straightforward. Oh, it's rare for you to be so generous. I'll definitely stay for a good meal. Xiao Jingyi looked at his pretentious expression and couldn't help but laugh. What are we eating tonight? Abalone, ginseng, shark's fin belly? It's a traditional snack in the Jiangnan area. Su Xinxing said seriously. Take a guess. Duck blood vermicelli soup? Xilong bao? Don't tell me it's beef dumplings? Looking at Su Xinxing constantly shaking his head, Xiao Jingyi really couldn't guess. Don't keep me in suspense. What exactly is it? Plain_noodles. Yang Chun noodles. Let me tell you, don't underestimate Yang Chun noodles. It's something that the emperors of the dynasty used to travel incognito in the south. Su Xinxing was just about to deceive Xiao Jingyi cough, popularized the knowledge of Yang Chun noodles when he was interrupted by a ringtone. He impatiently took out his phone and found that it was an unfamiliar number. It was probably another scam or promotion. Although that was what he thought, Su Xinxing still picked up the phone. Hello, I'm your aunt. And I'm your father. After hanging up the strange phone call with a click, Su Xinxing intended to continue talking. Where was I? Chapter 249. After sending off Xiao Jingyi and the others, because there were no classes in Jiangjin University this afternoon, Su Xinxing began to prepare for his job. Chihaya Fukuyama's student status had not been settled yet, so he planned to take Asahi Sakura Kanji to visit the earth god Loli. Asahi Sakura Kanji was also very interested in the earth god of this place. Qin Xingyan asked for leave and did not plan to go to school. Instead, he was going to try to remove the restrictions set by Sang Sherman on the Ghost's Blade. I also have to participate in the guild activities, so I won't go to school. Emoli saw that everyone did not seem to plan to go to school, so he confidently said to Su Xinxing. In the end, he was miserably suppressed by the latter and was sent to school. When Su Xinxing returned home and was about to change into the Shaoling Snack's employee uniform, he found that there was a guest at home. Qin Xingyan seemed to be receiving the other party. There were not many guests at Sakura apartment. Except for Xiao Jingyi and the others who had just been sent off, it seemed that not many people would come here. Could it be Song Yu? With such a casual thought, Su Xinxing came to the living room. A middle-aged woman in office was sitting on the sofa and talking to Qin Xingyan. Even if Su Xinxing only casually listened to a few words, he found that the other party was gossiping about the relationship between Qin Xingyan and Su Xinxing. Seeing Su Xinxing come in, Qin Xingyan seemed to have seen his savior. With a red face, he said that he had something to do and hurriedly left the living room as if he had been granted amnesty. He did not even have time to cry out in pain when his little toe hit the cabinet halfway. This girl is quite nice, and she seems to be a bit interested in you. It's rare for her to disregard her reputation to live with you. Little Su, don't miss this opportunity, the middle-aged woman said to Su Xinxing with interest. Su Xinxing was stunned when he heard this. Then he carefully looked at the other party's appearance. For some reason, there was a subtle sense of familiarity. After a while, the memories that had been sleeping in the depths of his mind slowly surfaced. That was his memory when he was just an ordinary person. After his mother ran away with a rich man, he had almost no contact with his relatives on his mother's side. Only his mother's elder sister, his aunt, would occasionally come to help him, a poor nephew, with some money as living expenses. Thanks to this aunt, Su Xinxing did not starve to death at home when he was in elementary school because of his father, who cheated his son. Although Su Xinxing began to work to earn money after junior high school and basically didn't receive money from his aunt after that, he still couldn't forget her kindness. Wait a minute. Now that I think about it, the voice on the phone earlier seems to be this aunt's. She is only my lodger, aunt. Therefore, he honestly greeted the other party. My father is still in the laboratory at Jiangjin University. Do you want me to help you find him? According to the time in this world, Su Xinxing and this aunt had not seen each other for about 3 or 4 years. However, Su Xinxing's 3 years of rich and colorful experience in a sense made him forget what he was like in the past. Because of this, the current situation gave him a headache, and he didn't know how he should face this relative of his. Therefore, he planned to push the blame to his father. It was rare for this guy who always cheated his son to come back to Jiangjin, so it shouldn't be a problem for him to take the blame for his son, right? No need. I have nothing to say to that guy. This time, I came to find you. Su Shenxing's plan to shift the blame to his aunt was directly ruined by her words. He could only sit on the sofa obediently, waiting for the other party's next words. If Xiao Jingyi saw him like this, he would definitely be shocked and then ask Feng Xiaoqing to go out and have a big meal to express his schadenfreude. He decided to go to Xiao Jingyi's place tonight for a meal. Xiao Jingyi, who was far away at the Public Security Bureau, sneezed. Actually, the reason I came this time is a little related to your mother. Aunt slowly said, I know, you probably still hate your mother for abandoning you and your father, but no matter what, she is still your biological mother. Things like blood relations can't be cut off. Aunt, if you have something to say, just say it. I don't have a heart disease, I can take it. Seeing that the other party seemed to be a little worried, Su Shenxing simply smiled brightly, showing a business-like smile. To be honest, he didn't feel any hatred towards his mother anymore. In countless worlds, he had seen many families that were more miserable than his, and he also knew what kind of consequences this kind of hatred would cause if it spread. What's more, the flow of time had already smoothed out his emotions, and the resentment in his heart had disappeared. Actually, your mother and your stepfather. When she said this word, his aunt carefully observed Su Shenxing's expression. When she found that her nephew didn't look angry, she couldn't help but sigh in relief. At the same time, she also sighed that Su Shenxing had finally grown up. In the past, although this kid didn't act too violently because he had entered society too early, at least he would definitely show an unhappy expression. They had a car accident a while ago and have passed away. Hearing this, Su Shenxing, who had long been relieved of his mother's remarriage, couldn't help but feel a little confused. He couldn't tell what kind of feeling he had in his heart, but he was slightly disappointed. You also know that your grandparents died early, and your stepfather's parents also passed away early, so their funerals have always been delayed. I think it can't go on like this, so I took the initiative to talk to their relatives. They plan to hold the funeral tomorrow. After all, no matter what, your mother's body can't be left there. After a pause, she stared at Su Shenxing's face, as if she was observing his expression, and then said, What I mean is, the dead are the most important. If you are free tomorrow, can you come to the funeral? After all, you are your mother's child. Su Shenxing was silent for a long time. Indeed, the dead were the most important. To be honest, Su Shenxing didn't dislike attending the funeral itself. However, the problem was that many of his mother's relatives were not as kind as his aunt. When he was young, and his father brought him to argue with his mother, many of them mocked and ridiculed the father and son duo. Even after that, they added insult to injury. When he was young, Su Shenxing never saw his mother again. Many of the reasons were that he was disgusted by these relatives who despised the poor and favored the rich. Even now, although he didn't hate his mother, he still didn't want to see those guys. It was true that Su Shenxing was no longer what he used to be. He had become a lord who could kill any god or Buddha who stood in his way. However, this book was not an urban long outyin novel, and he did not intend to show off and slap the faces of those relatives who had looked down on him in the past. However, this did not prevent them from sticking their faces out. Okay, I'll go. In the end, Su Shenxing sighed and agreed with his aunt. This made his aunt feel relieved. You are indeed your mother's child. I won't argue with you about what you said on the phone before. I don't think you will use those words against me when I don't agree. Su Shenxing muttered in his heart. But it wasn't that he didn't understand his aunt's difficulties. After all, if he didn't show up at the funeral, then his mother's life would be a failure. Chapter 250. The funeral was held in a large villa where Su Shenxing's mother lived. Although Su Shenxing had long known that his stepfather was quite rich, he was still a little surprised when he saw the spacious villa and the courtyard where he could play football. What an amazing place! Su Shenxing had seen places much bigger than this, not to mention other places. Just the super royal palace of the Star Ocean Kingdom in Centaurus, which occupied almost 17% of the surface area of the planet, could be compared to thousands of such villas. However, at least in Jiangjin, Su Shenxing had never seen such a large house. The exterior of the villa was a mansion full of the Western Rococo style. If one looked down from the sky, it would probably appear as a concave character. The main venue of the funeral was at the bottom of the concave character, which was probably the location of the hall. Although the interior and exterior of the villa were Western style, the funeral was very local. When Su Shenxing arrived, the traditional mourning was going on. The few people who were kneeling in front of the body of the deceased were very unfamiliar. Su Shenxing was sure that he had never seen them before. He didn't know if they were his stepfather's relatives or professional mourners he had hired. In addition, rather than crying, it was better to say that they were howling, which made Su Shenxing very uncomfortable. Not only that, even the layout of the funeral hall was very sloppy. According to the funerals that Su Shenxing had attended before, the body of the deceased was usually placed in a transparent coffin surrounded by flowers. But at this time, there was only a Gothic black wooden coffin in the center of the hall. Yes, there was only one coffin. 2 people died, and even the black and white photos in front of the coffin showed 2 people, but there was only one coffin. This strange scene made Su Shenxing feel a little strange. After finding his aunt in the crowd behind, Su Shenxing approached her. Compared to those who were howling, although his aunt didn't make a sound, there were traces of tears in the corners of her eyes. It seemed that the sudden death of her sister, who grew up with her, still made her very sad. "Xiao Su, you're here." Seeing Su Shenxing appear with Emily, Su Shenxing's aunt was stunned for a moment. Then she rubbed her eyes, looked at Emily strangely, and asked, "She is my sister. Her name is Emily." Su Shenxing lied without blushing or panting. "My dad picked her up from somewhere." Emily stepped on Su Shenxing's foot without batting an eyelid, making the latter's face twitch. However, Su Shenxing's aunt didn't suspect anything. "Humph, I already knew that your father wasn't a good person. Little Su, don't learn from him." As a result, old man Su became a scapegoat without knowing it and became a man who couldn't control his bird. In this regard, Su Shenxing could only laugh dryly and brush it off. "Auntie, why is there only one coffin?" Su Shenxing pulled Jasmine, who didn't have the concept of funerals in this world and was drooling over the tribute, into his arms and asked his aunt. "Stingy." Speaking of this, Su Shenxing's aunt looked indignant. "Originally, your mom and that person died in a car accident. When their bodies were pulled out of the car, they were already smashed beyond recognition. Even the makeup artist couldn't fix them. In the end, they could only burn them. Some bastards made a big deal out of it. The coffin you see now only has 2 jars of ashes and a few pieces of clothing." She spat at the empty space. "Bah, a bunch of traitors. They want to divide the property, even though their bodies are not cold yet. Since their bodies were smashed beyond recognition, how could they recognize my mom and them?" Su Shenxing asked curiously. "Maybe someone borrowed their car and got hit and killed. If they didn't die, why haven't they appeared yet?" His aunt seemed to be confused by Su Shenxing's question. She glanced at him and said, "The most important thing is that there were people who survived the car accident." As she spoke, she curled her lips in the direction of the courtyard. Su Shenxing walked to the window and looked down. He saw a lonely figure standing next to the flower bed in the courtyard, staring at the tall hibiscus tree in the middle of the flower bed. The snow-white hibiscus flowers were blooming on the branches and looked extremely beautiful. It was a little girl who looked a little cold. Her right hand was still in a cast and hung in front of her chest. She wore a black dress that looked like a hibiscus flower. It slightly trembled in the early autumn wind and made people want to protect her. "Who is she?" Su Shenxing asked curiously. "Your sister." "Auntie, I'm talking to you nicely."
Can you not scold me?
Su Shenxing said helplessly.
Who's scolding you?
"I mean, she's your sister." Su Shenxing's aunt rolled her eyes. Then, as if she was afraid that Su Shenxing wouldn't understand, she explained, "She has the same mother but different fathers." As she spoke, she glanced at Emily, who was restlessly twisting in Su Xinqing's arms, and said, "She's a little similar to your half-sister. She's the one who survived the car accident." Yes, the little girl was sitting in the back seat at the time. After your mother's car was overturned, the two people in the driver's seat and the passenger's seat died on the spot. The little girl only had a few broken bones and some minor abrasions. His aunt sighed. She's also a poor child. I don't know what she's going to do in the future. I'll go take a look. Su Xinqing suddenly ran out of the house with Emily. Hey, you haven't kowtowed in front of the picture yet. Oh, is it okay for you to be here? Su Xinqing's sudden question made the girl, who was staring at the hibiscus flower in a daze, shrink her shoulders. Then, she carefully turned to him and curiously looked at Jasmine, who was behind Su Xinqing, who was making an OTZ because she couldn't eat a big meal for the time being. Uncle said he didn't need my help. If I stayed there, I would only cause trouble. After a while, she whispered to Su Xinqing, Uncle? Uncle Chao, my dad's brother. The girl briefly described Uncle Chao's appearance. Su Xinqing immediately recalled that there was indeed a middle-aged uncle who looked like this at the funeral. He looked very arrogant and didn't treat himself as a guest at all. I don't like that uncle, Su Xinqing said in a serious tone. The little girl paused for a moment and then whispered, I don't like him either. Her tone sounded like they shared a common enemy. At the same time, it seemed like she was getting closer to Su Xinqing. Sure enough, talking behind someone's back was one of the most important ways to build a relationship. Just as Su Xinqing was about to ask the girl about the car accident, he suddenly realized that he forgot to ask his aunt a very important question. What was my sister's name again? Chapter 251. Uncle, are you also here to attend my parents' funeral? Because Su Xinqing was in a daze, the girl asked curiously. Yes, that's right. Su Xinqing nodded reflexively. Then he suddenly realized, what the hell is an uncle? Do I look like I'm that old? I'm only 5 years older than you, okay? Are you a relative on my mother's side or my father's side? I'm your brother. In the end, Su Xinqing didn't say this sentence out loud. He just answered casually, I'm on your mother's side, and in terms of blood, I'm quite close, but I've never seen you before. The girl said with certainty. Her pair of limpid eyes were fixed on Su Xinqing. Even the latter, whose face was already thick enough to withstand the starship's main cannon, felt a little uncomfortable under her gaze. Because I have some conflicts with your mother. Since you were born, I've never seen her again. It's normal that you don't know me. Su Xinqing explained dryly. Just like how I don't know you. By the way, what's your name?
Chiketsu E.
Isn't your father's surname Chao? I took my mother's surname. The girl's expression said, you don't even know this? Are you here to freeload? Which made Su Xinqing very embarrassed. I'm here for business. The one who wants to freeload is Emily, okay? Unfortunately, he couldn't say this out loud. How's your hand? So Su Xinqing tried to change the topic. I heard that it's fractured. Yes, the doctor said that it'll take another 2 months to remove the cast. The girl nodded with a sad expression. Obviously, this topic reminded her of the previous car accident. Realizing that he had messed up, Su Xinqing hurriedly changed the topic again. Is this a hibiscus tree? This time, he set his sights on the few hibiscus trees in the parterre that did not fit in with the surrounding environment. This kind of thing is not common around here. My father planted it himself when I was born. He said that before my mother was pregnant with me, he dreamed of a lush hibiscus tree. The next day, my mother found out that I was pregnant with her at the hospital. Initially, he wanted to name me Hibiscus, but the fortune teller said that my fate wasn't suitable to have too many hibiscus in my name, so he changed it to Chiketsu. He seemed to have accidentally stepped on a bomb again. But this way, Su Xinqing also understood why the girl was staring at the hibiscus trees in a daze. It turned out that there was such a reason behind it. Compared to the large villa occupied by a group of strangers, it was clear that these few hibiscus trees were more suitable for the girl's longing for her parents. Just as Su Shenxing was still hesitating whether he should try to find a new topic, the girl suddenly said softly, "My parents were killed." What? Although the girl's voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzz, Su Shenxing still heard it with his extraordinary hearing. This surprised our protagonist and, at the same time, made his heart sink. Even if he did not have a good impression of his biological mother, and they had not seen each other since he was 5 years old, no matter what, she was still his biological mother. If the car accident was just an accident, then it would be fine. But if there was really someone behind it, then at least he had to find the culprit and avenge his biological mother. It could also be considered as repaying his biological mother's kindness for bringing him into this world. "Do you know anything?" Su Shenxing asked the girl in a low voice. "Some time before my parents were killed, a strange thing appeared in our house. It was like a black shadow, and it always disappeared in a flash. Occasionally at night, its footsteps would be heard in the corridor." The girl seemed to have recalled something terrifying, and her petite body trembled slightly. "I told my parents and the nanny, but they didn't believe me. Children generally had a stronger sense of perception than adults, so most of the time, children were more likely to see supernatural creatures." Although Su Shenxing did not do much research in this area, he used to read in various literature books such as Babies Can See Ghosts, so most of the time, they will act strangely or suddenly cry, and so on. Compared to boys of the same age, girls were more likely to encounter ghosts due to their overall fate. "The day before the accident, I was playing in the yard with my father, and then I saw, at the window on the 3rd floor of the north side of the villa, there was a—" The girl turned her head and pointed at the villa, probably wanting to point out the thing she saw to Su Shenxing, but she stopped halfway through her words. Su Shenxing, who felt strange, glanced at her and found that the girl's face was pale, and her expression was frightened. Her pupils had shrunk, as if she had seen something terrifying. Su Shenxing looked in the direction her finger was pointing, and he was slightly stunned. In the window she pointed out, a black shadow with snow-white eyes was looking down at them. Using the window as a reference, the black shadow's physique was much stronger than a human's. Its shoulder width was more than 1.5 meters, and its height was about 3 meters as high as Jiangjin. If it was purely seen as a silhouette, although it looked like a human at first glance, it did not have a head upon closer inspection. What Su Shenxing originally thought was its eyes was actually closer to its chest. The curse is not over. The girl beside Su Shenxing's legs went weak and she collapsed to the ground, her whole body trembling uncontrollably. Her small face was frighteningly pale, without a trace of blood. "Its next target is me?" Su Shenxing also came to at this time, and waved his hand. "Emoli! Emoli! Meow meow meow!" Su Shenxing weakly covered his forehead. Perhaps feeling that Su Shenxing's reaction was not right, Emoli used his hand to make a cat's ear shape on his head. "Meow meow meow. I didn't ask you to act cute. Let me see the atmosphere." Su Shenxing felt even more exhausted. "Although it was indeed very cute, I'm going to investigate that thing. Do you want to come with me?" The deeply sealed Emoli, who had turned into a young girl, was temporarily unreliable, so Su Shenxing decided to personally go. He asked Chiketsu, "I'll investigate?" The girl blinked her eyes, as if she did not understand Su Shenxing's meaning. Investigate, a verb, generally speaking, it refers to conducting an investigation in order to understand the situation, Su Shenxing said seriously. "I didn't mean that. Aren't you afraid?" The girl asked in surprise. "I've never believed in these supernatural things. I only believe in my own fists." Su Shenxing continued to answer seriously, and secretly added in his heart, "Also my sword and Emily's Italian cannon." Chapter 252. According to Chiketsu, the north side of the 3rd floor of the villa was originally used to store miscellaneous items. Usually, other than the servants of the villa, who routinely cleaned the place, almost no one would go there. In the few days after she first saw the black shadow, she had asked the servants who were in charge of cleaning about the situation there. However, the servants did not find anything strange. The little girl did not have the courage to go there herself, so in the end, the matter was left unsettled. However, after discovering that there was something suspected of being unclean in her house, the little girl began to become a little paranoid. Not only did she stick to her parents all day long, she did not even dare to turn off the lights to sleep at night. In the end, her parents had no choice but to take her to a psychiatrist. After saying this, the girl did not continue speaking, but Su Shinxing could almost guess that the car accident must have happened when the girl's parents took her to see a psychiatrist. Are we really going? The girl behind Su Shinxing was like a newborn quail, trembling as she asked anxiously. If he remembered correctly, this was the 12th time she had asked this question. If you're really scared, you don't have to go. Mo Li and I are enough. Su Shinxing sighed. Originally, he wanted the girl to go with them so that she could give him directions or something. However, the girl had been hiding behind him all this time. She did not even dare to look forward, let alone give him directions. The expression on Chiketsu's face was constantly changing like an amoeba. It was obvious that she was struggling in her heart. After a while, she raised her head. Although her frightened look did not change, her watery eyes revealed a look full of determination. I want to go. At least I want to know what killed my parents. Su Shinxing showed some appreciation. He was now considered to have seen a lot. When a normal person encountered a supernatural phenomenon that was enough to destroy their worldview, he naturally knew how terrible their reaction would be. In fact, even some supernatural enthusiasts would be afraid when they came into contact with a real supernatural phenomenon. That kind of love was based purely on the mentality of seeking novelty. After all, it was just a hobby of Yigong. But Yi Chuyue was different. She was obviously afraid of that kind of thing. In this case, even if she didn't go, no one would blame her. But in order to give an explanation to her deceased parents, she still wanted to go with Su Shinxing to the place where the black shadow was, even if she was shaking like a vibrating phone. Originally, Su Shinxing thought that if they wanted to go upstairs, they would have to use the high-class marble stairs in the central hall. This was because he had wandered around the villa twice and could not find the other stairs. The problem was that the central hall looked like a morning hall, and there was a group of people mourning in the morning hall. It was obviously not an atmosphere where they could casually go upstairs. Just as he was considering whether he should simply find a piece of black cloth to cover his face and bring the two girls to barge in, the girl who had been timidly following behind him opened her mouth to speak. Turn right here. Su Shinxing was stunned at first, because if they turned left, they would reach the main hall. If they turned right, who knew which corner they would end up in? But he immediately reacted. Damn it, the owner of this villa is here. It won't be difficult to find another staircase. Not long after, the girl led Su Shinxing and Mo Li to a hidden wooden spiral staircase. According to Chiketsu, this staircase was usually used by the servants when they went out to fool around with her father or when they were escaping from her mother's pursuit because of their fooling around. This information was so overwhelming that Su Shinxing could not help but wonder what his mother was like after she remarried. Why did it feel like she was so fierce? Without further ado, with Chiketsu leading the way, Su Shinxing quickly arrived at the corridor on the north side of the 3rd floor. The layout of the corridor was not much different from the rest of the villa. The only difference was that there were not many windows, and there were some problems with the design. The lighting was not good, so compared to the other corridors, it was a little darker. That thing just now is standing here, right? Su Shinxing walked to the window they saw in the courtyard and began to investigate. In any case, he thought that there were two possibilities for what happened in the courtyard. The first was, of course, that there was a monster lurking in the villa, trying to take the heads of the Chow couple and little Chiketsu. But if that was the case, the monster lurked in the house for so long without making a move. In the end, it ran outside to find a car and killed the Chow couple, leaving only the little girl alone. It felt a little strange. What was the meaning of lurking in the villa? The second possibility was that the black shadow was just a phantom. Additionally, this phantom had to be created through the principle of optics, because traditional illusions that targeted at the brain or nerves of humans were as useless to Su Shinxing as using water splash on an iron shell chrysalis. To be honest, Su Shinxing was leaning towards the second guess. After all, If the monster could really stay in the villa for so long without anyone noticing, there was no need for it to pretend to be a ghost to scare the little girl, right? It could have just taken an axe or a kitchen knife and chopped the Chow couple to death behind them while they were asleep. At most, it would be difficult to deal with the aftermath. After chopping them into 17 or 18 pieces, it would be difficult to disguise it as a suicide or a love-hate relationship. However, after a careful investigation, Su Xinqing found some clues. Putting aside what the little girl saw a few days ago, at least just now, there was probably something standing here for a while. Because the two masters of the house were in trouble, and the little girl was hospitalized because of a fracture, the servants in the house did not clean the house according to their usual habits. As a result, there was a lot of dust on the ground. Ordinary people would not be able to see it with their poor eyesight, but Su Xinqing could see a pair of unusual large footprints on the ground. Unfortunately, he was not a criminal investigation student, so he could not see anything from the footprints. In addition, there seemed to be some strange dust on the windowsill and near the footprints. This made Su Xinqing a little concerned. He touched his pocket, took out a 1 yuan bill, and wrapped the dust in the bill. He planned to ask Xingyan A. Meng if she recognized this kind of dust when he went back. Just as Su Xinqing was about to continue looking for other clues in the vicinity, his phone rang. In the slightly dim, empty, and quiet corridor, the three of them were seriously investigating a supernatural mystery. In this situation, which was quite like a horror story, suddenly, a burst of singing broke the silence, causing Chiketsu to look at Su Xinqing with a complicated gaze. The latter thickened his skin and coughed dryly before picking up the phone. "I'm your aunt." "Ahem." "I'm still your, aunt." "What's the matter?" Su Xinqing subconsciously wanted to complain, but then he remembered that the number seemed to be his aunt's phone number, so he coughed dryly and corrected himself. "Where did you go, kid?" His aunt's voice sounded a little dissatisfied. "Wandering around." Su Xinqing thought for a while and answered concisely. "Forget it." His aunt seemed to be choked by his answer, then sighed. "There's something important now. Hurry up and come back to the hall, okay?" "Okay." Chapter 253. Although Su Xinqing still had a lot of doubts about the Black Shadow, since her aunt had spoken, there was no reason for her to go against her. And if the target of the Black Shadow was really Chiketsu-e, then it would appear again sooner or later. As long as she was mentally prepared, Su Xinqing was confident that she could kill it in a flash. The only thing she had to be careful about was how much strength she used. Otherwise, the mysterious disappearance of a luxury villa would probably make the headlines the next day. Not long after Su Xinqing brought Chiketsu-e back to the living room under her aunt's meaningful gaze, the middle-aged man with the surname Chow gestured for everyone to go to the room that was probably the dining room, leaving behind a few crying people. "Although I'm very sad about my brother's death, now is not the time to be immersed in sorrow." The middle-aged man with the surname Chow seemed to be quite popular in Su Xinqing's stepfather's family. His style was also a little overbearing. As soon as he arrived at the dining room, he sat down at the main seat and looked around at everyone. Other than a blonde girl with double ponytails who seemed to be muttering something like, "Why isn't there food in the dining room?" or "I'm hungry." Everyone else was quietly listening to him. "Because my brother's death was a little sudden. He didn't leave a will. Because of this, his considerable wealth will inevitably attract the covetous eyes of some rascals." As he spoke, he glanced at the girl's family, who were spontaneously sitting on the other side of the table, as if to say that they were the so-called rascals. "It just so happens that I have an important position in my brother's company. Although my words can't be taken seriously, at least they have some weight." He scanned the crowd and found Chiketsu-e, who was subconsciously following Su Xinqing. He then flashed the girl a smile that he thought was amiable, scaring the girl into hiding behind Su Xinqing. "Why don't I temporarily manage the company and adopt my niece? When my niece grows up, I'll return the family business to her. What do you think?" "That sounds good. Who knows if you'll just eat up your brother's family business and leave an empty shell for Chiketsu's girl." When the girl's family saw that the middle-aged man was eating meat while they couldn't even get a mouthful of soup, let alone shredded meat, someone immediately jumped out to object to Ali's suggestion. Uncle Chow's face changed. Although he did plan to do so, how difficult would it be for him to transfer the funds of his brother's family business to that company while he had great power? After all the transfer, these assets would have nothing to do with his niece. If that girl was sensible enough, it didn't matter if she ate well and drank well. In the future, she could be used as a bargaining chip in the business world to make profits for him through marriage with other rich families. If she dared to have any thoughts that she shouldn't have, as her guardian, it would be easy for him to punish her. However, it didn't matter if this kind of thing was done in private. It didn't matter even if everyone knew about it. But once it was exposed, no matter how thick-skinned he was, he couldn't sit still. This man looks a little unfamiliar. May I know who you are? What's your relationship with my brother? He hated him in his heart, but he couldn't show it too obviously. Otherwise, it would be bad if others thought that he had a guilty conscience. Since the other party was sitting with the girl's family, it wouldn't be difficult to make the connection. Since the family business was built up by his brother, he could just use this as a starting point and ask about the relationship between the other party and his brother. No matter how close the girl's family was, could they be closer than him? Mr. Chow, your words are meaningless. This family business will belong to Chiketsu in the future, but Chiketsu's surname isn't Chow. The girl's relative said in a carefree manner. These words were used to push the trap in Uncle Chow's words. It was quite clever. Oh, then what do you plan to do? Uncle Chow asked coldly when he saw the duck that was about to jump up and fly away. He was so angry that he laughed and asked coldly. Of course. Everyone will have a share. The other party seemed to have guessed that Uncle Chow would ask this question. He answered without thinking, although there's only one company, we can share the shares. Everyone here will have a share. Those who adopted Chiketsu's daughter will have double the shares. Originally, many of the relatives who weren't very close to the deceased thought that they wouldn't have anything to do with this and were ready to watch the show. They didn't expect that when the girl's relative said this, even they, who were just bystanders, would have a share of the benefits. They immediately cheered loudly and supported the leader of the girl's relative. Even many of the man's relatives started to change sides. Uncle Chow saw that the possibility of him taking the fat meat alone was very slim. He couldn't help but snort coldly. Of course I'll adopt my niece, but I want half of the shares. What a big appetite. Aren't you afraid of dying from overeating? The girl's relative sneered in his heart. This uncle didn't repent even after angering everyone. He didn't understand the principle of fairness at all. He really lived like a dog. How about this? After we split the shares, the person who adopted Chiketsu's daughter can have 3 shares. You can also take this villa. If you don't want to adopt her, I'll take care of her. When they heard that adopting Chiketsu's daughter would have such great benefits, some of the other relatives also spoke up one after another, saying that their place was more suitable for the little girl to live and grow up. Suddenly, the restaurant was as noisy as a wet market. Just as this quarrel was about to evolve into a brawl between hooligans, a loud bang startled everyone, and the entire restaurant fell into an eerie silence. Everyone's eyes were focused on one person. Su Shinxing was still pounding the table as he coldly looked around at everyone. The long marble table, which could theoretically withstand more than a ton of weight, was directly broken into 2 from where he stood. Everyone who was swept by his gaze lowered their heads guiltily. No one felt that their bodies could be stronger than the marble table. It was only then that Su Shinxing turned his head and looked at Chiketsu, who was also startled. The little girl still had tears in the corners of her eyes, but it wasn't because she was frightened by Su Shinxing's actions. Instead, it was because her relatives had made a fool of themselves when they fought for the ownership of the villa and 3 times the shares. She couldn't help but sob. Although Su Shinxing didn't particularly understand why the little girl was crying, Su Shinxing was certain that it was definitely not because of these people's enthusiasm for adopting her. Rather, Su Shinxing was very unhappy with the feeling of giving the little girl a price tag. Let me reintroduce myself. I'm your half-brother. My name is Su Shinxing. He reached out his hand to the girl. I don't need the villa or the shares. Do you want to live with me? Of course, Your life will be a little poor. Chiketsu stared blankly at him for a few seconds. Then, like a small animal, he shakily put his hand in Su Xinqing's hand. Wait a minute, little brother. I'm afraid this is not in line with the rules. The uncle surnamed Chao wanted to say something, but after Su Xinqing glared at him, he was speechless. Shut up, he coldly snorted. What's wrong with a sister living with a brother? Chapter 254. Although some relatives seemed to want to have a friendly discussion about Su Xinqing's argument, Su Xinqing didn't want to waste time with them. He held Chiketsu's hand and led the girl and Mo Li, who was still angry because he didn't get to eat, out of the restaurant. On the way out, a few strong young men intentionally or unintentionally blocked the door, as if they wanted to block Su Xinqing from leaving by forming a human wall. However, Su Xinqing snorted, turned around and walked towards the door, and directly crushed the tiles on the floor. Coupled with the broken marble table behind him, the young men's faces suddenly turned as white as the tiles that were hit by an unexpected disaster. Obviously, they didn't want to be crushed to death and silently made way for Su Xinqing. Thus, Su Xinqing easily broke out of the restaurant with Chiketsu. You're too reckless. Su Xinqing's aunt also left with him. Although his aunt seemed to be curious about Su Xinqing's ability to break the marble table with his bare hands and crush the tiles on the floor with his feet, these actions didn't exceed the limits of human beings in the eyes of most people. Their impression of him was that of a martial arts master or a black belt in Taekwondo. Su Xinqing didn't answer, and just silently walked towards the door. Chiketsu also lowered his little head, and no one knew what he was thinking. He just followed Su Xinqing, taking small steps, trying to keep up with his pace. The landlord is angry, Mo Li said expressionlessly, because the food hasn't been served for so long. Su Xinqing staggered when he heard that. Landlord? Su Xinqing's aunt was puzzled by the way Mo Li addressed Su Xinqing. It's just a small problem of this girl. Su Xinqing stopped and let go of Chiketsu's hand. He then turned around and pinched Mo Li's chubby little face with a fake smile. Do you think I'm like you? Mo Li wasn't afraid at all, but stared at Su Xinqing with her big cute eyes. The monofilament anti-freezing mud shredded by 80%. But the landlord is really angry, right? Su Xinqing was stunned for a moment. Then he let go of Mo Li's little face and let Mo Li cover her little face, her cheeks puffed up in anger. After all, he and Mo Li could be said to be of the same mind. Even if the girl was in a deep seal, it wasn't strange that she could feel his feelings. You can say that. He smiled bitterly and patted Chiketsu's little head. Looking at his curious eyes, he couldn't help but sigh. I'm sorry, although it seems like I'm angry because of you, but it's more about myself. Hearing him say that, Chiketsu showed a puzzled expression, and Mo Li, well, the little girl was still puffing up her cheeks like a golden squirrel storing food, with an expression that said, I'm angry. I won't get up until I get something good to eat. On the other hand, Su Xinqing's aunt showed a look of understanding. When Su Xinqing's parents divorced, he was only 5 years old. 5 years old was the time when a child could really remember things. Unfortunately, the first memory of Su Xinqing's life was not a good one. The figure of his mother, whom he once deeply missed, resolutely abandoned him, leaving behind a heartless figure and disappeared from his life. And his father was an extremely unreliable person. Although Su Xinqing was relatively restrained when he was young, but even so, he still disappeared for a period of time every year to go out on so-called scientific research expeditions. In the huge Sakura apartment, Su Xinqing was the only one left. When he fell, no one came to help him. When he was hungry, there was no food in the pot. When he cried, no one came to wipe his tears. When he came home from school, he was always greeted by an empty house. Every time at the parents' meeting, he could only hold his report card and look enviously at the warm interactions between other children and their parents. Be strong. Every time, Su Xinqing would say this to himself. Even if he was alone, he could live a good life. Therefore, when he fell, he would grit his teeth and stand up and then use the medicine box to treat his wounds. If he had no food, he would learn to cook by himself. Even if the food he made at first was no different from coke, he would try to swallow it so that he could cook better next time. He set a limit for himself that he could only cry once a year, and the only place he could cry was on the roof, where he could see the moon. It didn't matter if there was no one at home, because he had gradually become accustomed to loneliness. He thought that he could live like this forever. When he was about 9 years old, he lost contact with his father for more than half a year because of an accident. Almost all his relatives thought that his father had died. So they came to compete for the inheritance, which was the ownership of Sakura apartment. Unfortunately, Su Xinxing was different from Chiketsu. He was not a likable child, so no one planned to adopt him. Because all the people who came were from his father's side, even his aunt, who was the only one who was kind to Su Xinxing, was not present. It was not until later that she heard about this matter. Hearing that his relatives used all kinds of excuses to push him around like goods, and in the end, they all wanted to send him to an orphanage, Su Xinxing felt sad and angry at the same time. He did not know whether his father was dead or not, but he did not want to go to an orphanage. He was not an orphan. So he insisted that his father was still alive, took a kitchen knife from the kitchen, and drove all the so-called relatives out of the house. After all, as a minor, Su Xinxing did not have to take responsibility even if he killed someone. Those relatives were afraid that he, a hothead, would really make big news, so they all fled. Some of them wanted to get Sakura apartment to intervene through legal means. Fortunately, Su Xinxing's father came back in time, so Su Xinxing was not driven out of his house. From then on, Su Xinxing decided that he would no longer entrust his hopes to others. No matter how difficult it was, he would try his best to solve all the problems. It was also because of this that after he went to another world, even if his body was cut in half, even if his organs were pulled out, even if the person he loved the most died for him, even if he saw the destruction of the world with his own eyes, he did not despair. In the end, he destroyed the great devil realm and returned to this world. Sitting in his aunt's car, Su Xinxing sat in the front passenger seat and told the three of them about his past. He did not want to gain their sympathy, but simply wanted to explain why he was angry about Chiketsu's matter. He overlapped his past with the girl's current situation. That anger was not, at least not completely, because he wanted to seek justice for the girl, but because of his own past. After sending Su Xinxing back to Sakura apartment, his aunt looked at Su Xinxing. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she did not say anything. After saying goodbye to Su Xinxing, she drove away. "This is where you are going to live from now on." Su Xinxing took out the key and introduced it to Chiketsu as he was about to open the door. "Brother, is this where you used to live alone?" Chiketsu, who had heard some of Su Xinxing's stories in the car, curiously looked at the somewhat shabby Sakura apartment. "Yes." Recalling the lonely Sakura apartment, Su Xinxing's face softened. Then he opened the door with the key. The smell of food wafted from the kitchen. Other than Songyu, there was also Asahi Sakura Kanji's voice. It seemed that the two of them were cooking. On the other hand, he could vaguely hear Earth Goddess Loli and Chihaya Fukuyama making a fuss as they played FC in the living room. "You're back." Not far from the entrance, Qin Xingyan, who was nestled in a leather chair, hid the half-knitted scarf with the word Su on it behind her back. She said somewhat anxiously, "Why didn't you knock? I could have opened the door for you. It's just a whim." Su Xinxing smiled. Now, this apartment that used to be incomparably lonely had become lively. Chapter 255. Since her encounter with Su Xinxing was not normal, in a sense, Songyu was used to meeting unusual people in Sakura apartment. In fact, it was not only the tenants in the apartment, but even Sakura apartment itself, from the roof to the foundation, exuded a strong sense of mystery. Even though the owner, Su Xinxing, repeatedly insisted that Sakura apartment was just an ordinary dilapidated apartment. For example, in the innermost room of the second-floor corridor where Su Xinxing had forbidden her to enter, there was often a strange sound, as if someone was playing mahjong inside. In the courtyard outside the room, which was untended and overgrown with weeds, there was always a clump of peanut-like plants constantly changing its position. 2 days ago, it was still near the door, but these days, it had run to the small pond that had long dried up. The girl was also sure that she had seen a staircase that seemed to lead to the basement behind her when she was cleaning the room. However, after she hesitated for a moment, the staircase disappeared and was replaced by an ordinary little cubicle with brooms and the like. After becoming numb to this strange phenomenon, Su Shenqing suddenly brought back a girl who did not have any supernatural abilities. Other than being very cute, she was just an ordinary girl in every aspect. This made Song Yu feel quite shocked. In order to prevent his sister from being afraid of the strange phenomena in Sakura apartment, Su Shenqing even rolled up his sleeves and blocked the door of the innermost room of the second-floor corridor with a wooden plank. Although she did not know what happened to the staircase leading to the mysterious basement, at least the peanut clump, or something that looked like peanuts, outside the courtyard had disappeared. Of course, maybe the peanut clump only sensed danger and hid in the weeds. In any case, Song Yu was happy that there was finally a normal person like herself in Sakura apartment, not to mention that the other person was someone who could become her sister-in-law. Therefore, the number of times she went to Sakura apartment recently had inexplicably increased. On this day, when she walked into Sakura apartment with ingredients, she heard Su Shenqing talking to Qin Xingyan. Speaking of Qin Xingyan, Song Yu was a little surprised. In her impression, Qin Xingyan was just a rustic but very quiet girl in school. Her grades were just average, and she almost never went out to sing karaoke with other students. She was the obedient type and was not very popular among the boys. However, she did not expect that after taking off her glasses, her temperament would change so much. In fact, the main credit was the magic attached to her eyes. She gave people a feeling that she was full of immortal aura. If she appeared in school in the way she did in Sakura apartment, she would be able to easily attract a group of fans, although her taste in clothes was still very rustic. Something like this black shadow. Su Shenqing seemed to be trying to describe a strange thing, and then let Qin Xingyan guess its true form. Do you have any impression of this? Qin Xingyan thought for a while and finally shook his head. As far as I know, there should not be a creature with this appearance among the local monsters. What if it is not limited to monsters? Su Shenqing was silent for a moment and asked again. There were some ancient gods who looked like this. Senior, have you heard of Xingtian? The one who uses the nipple as the eyes, the navel as the mouth, and has to face the god of heaven's anus? Su Shenqing thought for a while and said with uncertainty. Yes, but in fact, there is another legend about Xingtian that is not so widespread. Qin Xingyan continued, legend has it that a long time ago, a man-eating beast appeared on the earth. In order to suppress it, the tribes at that time united and sent a team of the strongest warriors, and Xingtian was among them. Those warriors found the beast and fought with it. In the end, they finally captured and killed it in Changyang Mountain. However, there were only 2 warriors left in the team. One of them did not exert much strength during the battle and had been hiding all the time. It was not until the end of the battle that he attacked the other warrior who had made great contributions in the battle, which was Xingtian. In order to monopolize the glory of killing the beast, that person killed Xingtian, cut off his head, and hid it in Changyang Mountain. He took the beast's body back to the tribe to receive the reward. In the end, Xingtian's resentment was not quenched. He dragged his headless body and went to the tribe to kill that despicable coward. However, his appearance was regarded as a monster by the people in the tribe, and he was expelled. After that, Xingtian became a terrifying demon god who resented humans, especially treacherous villains. At this point, Qin Xingyan took a sip of tea, indicating that he was done. In other words, Qiuyu's parents did something treacherous and angered that thing. That's why they brought this disaster upon themselves? Su Shenqing quietly listened to her words and then muttered thoughtfully, "That's right." Thinking about it, there was nothing wrong with it. His biological mother left him and old man Su behind and ran away with a rich businessman. In a sense, it was treachery, right? I'm just saying, don't believe it too much. Qin Xingyan hurriedly waved his hand. No one knows what happened in the ancient times. The previous popular legend may be more credible. After all, there must be a reason for it to spread so widely. Who cares? Having a direction to investigate is better than not knowing anything. Su Shinxing rubbed his temples and said in distress, I'm not good at this kind of investigation, but all I've encountered recently is this kind of F***king thing. When will there be a situation where I can just rush over and solve it? I'm serious. This kind of thing is not very credible. After all, the legend of Xingtian can be traced back to at least 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. You said that the Black Shadow was more likely than Xingtian. Qin Xingyan also sighed and said helplessly. Mothman? Su Shinxing asked curiously. When I went to the bookstore to look for knitting, I was looking for information, and I accidentally came across a book about unidentified creatures. It recorded the story of the Mothman. Qin Xingyan frowned and tried hard to recall. Well, I don't remember the details, but its appearance is a little similar to what you described. Moreover, the Mothman itself is the representative of bad omens. It is said that as long as the Mothman appears, bad things will happen. The most famous of which is the Silver Bridge incident in West Virginia, the Kingdom of Hope. Forget it, whether it's the demon god Xingtian or Mothman, as long as we know their true forms, there's nothing to be afraid of. Su Shinxing stood up and seemed to be planning to go out. Because the villa in Chiketsu is a real estate, the group of relatives can't divide it up in the short term. I'll take this opportunity to go there again to investigate again. What about lunch? Song Yu, who was about to cook, hurriedly asked. Make me a bento. Su Shinxing hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he did not refuse the girl's kindness. I'll eat slowly after I find that thing. Chapter 256. Chaoge felt that things were not going well for him recently. He, who was approaching the age of 40, was still in a state of not having accomplished anything until the end of the year. However, he did not think that the reason was because of him. Even if he smoked, drank, and gambled, he felt that he still had talents that others did not realize. The reason why he did not have any achievements was purely because he was not serious yet. Plus, he was a little unlucky and did not catch a good opportunity. As for his younger brother, who had worked hard to build a family business at a young age, he had always thought that the other party was just lucky. If he could rely on his brother's luck, he would definitely be able to start from scratch. No, he might even be able to do better. Chao Ji's parents probably couldn't stand Chaoge idling around all day, so they talked to his younger brother at the beginning of the year. In the end, his younger brother compromised and recruited his brother, who didn't have a good reputation in his hometown, into his company and entrusted him with important tasks. In the end, things were still messed up by Chaoge. A big client completely cut off contact with Chao Ji's brother's company because of this. Chaoge did not care about this result. He had an expression that said, "This kind of small business, it doesn't matter if it's messed up." In desperation, Chao Ji's brother could only let his incompetent brother go to a department that looked very important but was actually quite idle. Chaoge was quite satisfied with this arrangement at first. However, it did not take long for him to begin to complain about his brother's arrangement. He felt that with his own talent, he should at least have a share of the human resources and financial power. However, these two rights were too important and even affected the normal operation of the company. Therefore, Chao Ji's brother had been shirking away and did not intend to give these two rights to his brother. Therefore, while Chaoge secretly hated in his heart, he also began to use his brother's name to start trouble everywhere, making the whole company a little bit of a mess. In the end, his brother was angry and directly pushed him to the logistics department. Although in order to save the face of his parents, Chaoge was not allowed to be a low-level errand boy. However, he was basically a marginal person who could only stay near the warehouse and would not appear in the company. Chaoge, who felt that he was being bullied by his younger brother, was naturally very dissatisfied with this. However, at this point, he no longer had the ability to fight back. In the end, he could only return to his idle life with his former group of bad friends while fishing for 3 days and drying his net. Originally, Chaoge thought that this kind of life would continue until he was old. However, A few months ago, he suddenly discovered an online gambling game called Wanjala. In the beginning, he had a small harvest and earned a lot of pocket money. In just 2 or 3 days, the money he earned was even more than his salary. Therefore, Chao felt that his talents were finally put to use. Instead of going to his younger brother's company and being bullied, it was better to lie comfortably at home and make money. Thus, he was completely addicted to online gambling games. But he didn't expect his luck to keep getting worse. Not only did he lose the money he earned at the beginning, but he also lost the money he earned from his brother's company for more than half a year. As a result, he became poor. However, due to the mentality of a gambler, the more he lost, the more he wanted to recoup his losses. When he had no money in hand, he went to borrow from others. Naturally, the borrowed money was also wasted. When no one was willing to lend him money, he even went to borrow money from loan sharks despite his parents' dissuasion. In the end, he still lost everything. When the loan sharks began to come to collect the debt, he panicked and knew that he seemed to be in trouble. Just when he was planning to cheat some money from his relatively rich younger brother by hook or by crook, an accident happened. His younger brother had a car accident and died in the car accident with his wife, leaving only an underage niece. Suddenly, Chao felt that he was going to be rich. As long as he could take over his younger brother's business, not to mention loan sharks, even if it was dozens of times more, he could take it out. Originally, he thought that it was quite good. He planned to temporarily take over his younger brother's business under the pretext of adopting his niece. In the end, he did not expect that someone would come out of nowhere and cut him off and took away his niece. Even if the kid claimed that he was not interested in the inheritance in his niece's hands, Chao felt that he was definitely lying when he judged others by himself. What's more, even if the other party was really not interested in his younger brother's business, just based on the bad reputation that Chao had in the business in just half a year, without a legitimate right to take over, his younger brother's talents would not be convinced by him. What made him even more crazy was that even his younger brother's expensive villa, because the name on the property certificate was his niece's name, and he was not the guardian, he had no right to share it. Seeing that the loan sharks were getting more and more ferocious, Chao did not continue to dawdle. He decided to take a risk. Although that was what he said, in fact, his plan was not that dangerous. Chao could not enjoy his younger brother's magnificent villa, but there were a lot of valuable things in the villa. In addition to his younger brother's elegant hobby, there were some authentic ancient paintings hidden in the house. Those ancient paintings were bought by his younger brother at the auction house at a high price. Now that so much time had passed, many of them were far more valuable than before. As long as he could steal 1 or 2 of them, the debt he owed would be basically paid off. If he could find the place where his younger brother hid the treasures, even if he could not control his younger brother's business, he could be a rich man for the rest of his life and live comfortably for the rest of his life. With this in mind, Chao bypassed the security guards at night and sneaked into his younger brother's villa. For others, this might be a bit difficult, but after all, Chao often came to his younger brother's house. Not only was he familiar with the road, but he had also secretly tampered with some of the surveillance cameras long ago, artificially creating a blind spot in the surveillance. As long as he paid attention to avoiding the security guards on patrol shifts, he would not be discovered. After spending more than half an hour, after using a stolen key to open a window in the blind spot, Chao successfully sneaked into his younger brother's original villa. The villa at night was more silent and terrifying than during the day. The deep corridor, the high ceiling, and the ticking of the clock made people involuntarily feel a sense of fear. Chao tried to calm the fear in his heart and began to explore the treasure room according to the route he had determined long ago. Chapter 257. Something's wrong. Chao walked in the dark corridor, feeling a little uneasy. Because he was afraid of being discovered by the security guards outside, he didn't dare to turn on the lights, so now he didn't know his exact location. However, from the feeling of time, he felt that he had been walking in the corridor for at least 10 minutes. Logically speaking, even if his hand slipped and he didn't find the door he wanted to sneak in, he should have reached the end of the corridor. However, the corridor in front of him was still the same as before. It was dark and deep, and he couldn't see the end. Not only that, even the window on the outside of the corridor that should have existed had disappeared at some point. This made the originally extremely dim corridor even darker. I can't go on like this. So he took out his mobile phone and used the flash on the camera as illumination. Risking the risk of being discovered, he carefully observed the surrounding situation while speeding up. What's going on? Where is this place? However, the more he walked, the more depressed he felt. He had been to his brother's villa many times. Although he couldn't say that he could walk to where he wanted to go with his eyes closed, he could be considered familiar with it. However, the surrounding scene was very unfamiliar. Rather than saying that he was in a Western-style manor house, it was more like a tunnel leading to an unknown place. The surroundings were seamless, and there were no doors or windows. However, some decorative items such as hanging paintings and statues were still there. However, those things were also very abnormal. There was a hanging painting every 10 meters, but none of them was a normal rectangle. They were all strange shapes like the color blocks in abstract paintings, and some were even twisted like bitten apples. Even the shapes were so strange, not to mention the content. None of the paintings were normal. They all looked like postmodernist paintings. The strange colors mixed with things that didn't have the original appearance at all highlighted the feeling of madness. The statues were similar to the paintings, becoming strange and terrifying. At first glance, they looked like centipedes, but in fact, they were the amalgamation of many hands stacked together. Some looked like ordinary rockery, but there were huge eyes and half a frightened human face on it. Some looked like a middle-aged man holding his head in pain, but the lower half of his body was a fat four-legged monster like a pig. Some looked like exquisite stone chairs, but there was a half-melted human sitting on top of them. After looking at these sculptures one by one, Chao Ji's scalp went numb. At the same time, he was certain that this was definitely not his younger brother's villa. What should I do? He looked around in fear, trying to find a way out. Suddenly, some subtle sounds that were usually hard to detect but became very obvious in this quiet environment came from not far away. Chao Ge raised his head and saw a figure with the head of a deer and the body of a human. It was more than 3 meters tall and held a huge axe. What he thought was a statue actually turned its head and looked at him. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. Without any hesitation, he turned around and ran. Almost at the same time, a loud bang came from the statue, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Even without looking back, Chao Ge could guess that the statue had come alive and was chasing after him. What the hell is this? Chao Ge, who liked to read grave robber novels and movies, started to have strange thoughts in his head due to the lack of oxygen. Damn it, what kind of evil thing did my brother collect to cause such an incredible thing to happen? Suddenly, he staggered and rolled down a flight of stairs that appeared out of nowhere. He fell to the ground and felt dizzy. His bones felt weak and numb, and all the bones in his body felt like they were falling apart. He was in so much pain that he didn't even have the strength to stand up. In his hazy consciousness, he found that the room he was in was abnormally spacious. Compared to the dark corridor, it was much brighter. Immediately, the magnificent scenery around him made him realize that this was probably some kind of hall. However, before he could react, a shadow covered his face. His eyelids twitched, and he looked at the shadow, only to see the head of a deer staring at him. It slowly raised the rusty axe in its hand. The next moment, in the large hall that looked like an ancient palace, there was a blood-curdling scream and the sound of a blunt axe cutting into flesh. Something was wrong. Su Xinxing walked down the dark corridor. He felt that the room wasn't as simple as he thought. Although he sneaked into the house, physically, by making all the security guards doze off because he couldn't control his strength well, he was afraid that the security guards wouldn't doze off for too long. He needed to solve the problem in the shortest time possible. Su Xinxing ate his lunch while thinking about what to do next. Ugh, there's actually prawns inside. Although prawns were the type that was raised lightly, Su Xinxing still couldn't help but cough because of the psychological trauma caused by his seafood allergy. By the time he came back to his senses, the scene around him seemed to be different from before. What happened? Where is this place? He put away the lunchbox and scratched his head. Did I accidentally get lost? Although he had been to this villa before when he attended the funeral, he didn't take a good look around the villa at that time due to various reasons. Although this time, he followed the route that Ichiwa took before and headed straight to the third floor, it was understandable that he would end up in a strange place because he accidentally ate some prawns and became absent-minded. The more he walked forward, the more strange the surroundings became. Soon, he found that he seemed to have mistakenly entered a strange space. Those paintings and statues full of arrogance did not cause too much trouble for Su Shinching. When he was fighting in the great demonic realm, he had seen many monsters that were more abstract than these things. In fact, compared to some of the Demon King's army officers, these strange sculptures could already be considered cute. This level of mental pollution was useless to Su Shinching. As he walked, he suddenly felt a strong gust of wind coming from behind his head. Su Shinching didn't dodge. He just stretched out a finger. With a clang, the finger was embedded in the blade of a rusty axe. At this time, Su Shinching turned his head and saw the thing that attacked him. It was a white statue with the head of an elk and the lower body of a naked human. By the way, the reason why it was described as a human was because the lower part of this thing was as bare as the models in the mall. There was nothing, so he couldn't tell its gender. What the hell is this? Su Shinching flew up and kicked the sculpture over. After watching it fall to the ground and shatter into pieces, he felt a little regretful. Not good. I can't be the one to pay for breaking the statue here, right? After thinking for a few seconds, he decided to pretend that he didn't know anything and continue to explore this strange space. In fact, when the statue suddenly began to move, Su Shinching felt that this space seemed to have changed. Chapter 258. Although Su Shinching vaguely felt that some kind of change had occurred in this space, he was not the perceptive type, so he did not know what exactly had changed. After thinking for a while, Su Shinching turned around and walked in the direction he came from. He did not intend to leave this space. In fact, after entering the different space, his original sense of direction was no longer sufficient. If he really wanted to leave here, he just needed to take out Roll and Duel and swipe it casually. Su Shinching chose to go back because he found a faint smell of blood coming from behind. Sure enough, he did not walk far before he found a staircase leading downwards in front of him. At first, the staircase was similar to the material of the corridor, giving a feeling of rough limestone, but the further down he went, the more exquisite it became. After about half a minute of walking, the entire staircase could be described as carved railings and made of jade. This is really... Su Shinching touched the jade-colored handrail, and after confirming that this was not an illusion with his physique, he could not help but sigh. It's incredible. Although he had seen planets in the universe that were almost entirely made of gold, it was obviously more full of the feeling of nouveau riche compared to the current environment, but the yellow feces that filled his eyes at that time could not be compared to this scenery that was obviously carefully arranged. Maybe he could just casually pick a piece here and live a carefree life for a long time. However, Su Shinching did not do so, but continued to walk down the stairs. The deeper he went, the stronger the smell of blood became. Finally, when he reached the end of the stairs, a pile of minced meat that could no longer be distinguished appeared in front of him. The minced meat was soaked in dark red blood, and if he looked carefully, he could see some tattered cloth mixed in it. It was probably the original clothes of this pile of minced meat. Judging from the degree of decomposition, this pile of minced meat should have died not long ago. Whether it was the smell of blood or the minced meat itself, they were all very fresh. Su Shinching had also encountered many corpses in the past battles, so he could still make this kind of judgment. However, the passage of time in the different space and the speed of decomposition of the corpses were not necessarily the same as on Earth, so this did not mean anything. Su Shinching continued to look ahead. In front of the stairs was a very wide space. It even gave people the feeling that they were not in some kind of underground facility, but on the surface. However, this was not the ground after all. With Su Shenxing's extraordinary eyesight, he could still see through the darkness and see the domed rock formations and stalactites above. Although the ceiling looked like an ordinary cave, the ground was paved with high-quality bluestone slabs. Around them, one could vaguely see towering pillars. Just these alone were enough to give people a sense of grandeur and magnificence. Su Shenxing left the unidentified corpse and continued to walk forward. Not long after, a towering palace appeared in front of him, which surprised him. He didn't expect that there would be a palace in a cave like this. However, this kind of terrain made him have a new guess. Could it be that this is an ancient tomb? Legend had it that there was a majestic underground palace built in Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum. It even imitated the geography of the whole world at that time, with Mercury as the rivers and seas, surging endlessly. However, this made things even more strange. Why would Chiketsi's Western-style villa be related to this kind of mausoleum with obvious ancient characteristics of the Celestial Dynasty? With such doubts, Su Shenxing slowly walked into the palace. Unlike what he had expected, the decoration in the palace was not very magnificent. At most, it was similar to the stairs. Most of the corners were not made of gold, silver, jade, or jewelry, but bronze. Vaguely, Su Shenxing seemed to see a figure flashing in the depths of the palace. This was good news. Since entering this strange space, Su Shenxing had not encountered anything alive except for a moving statue. But when he got close to the so-called figure, he was disappointed. In the depths of the palace, there was a huge bronze cauldron. He didn't know what kind of fuel was burning under the cauldron, but he only saw an almost white flame. The flame licked the belly of the bronze cauldron, and even the bottom of the bronze cauldron was burning red. There was a lot of water in the bronze cauldron. At this moment, it was boiling like the hot spring in the basement of Sakura apartment. Behind the bronze cauldron stood two corpses. The reason why he didn't need to confirm that they were corpses was because the two bodies didn't have heads, and the wounds on their necks looked very fresh, as if they had just been beheaded. The shadows of the two corpses were projected on the screen behind the cauldron, and were constantly changing because of the dancing flames under the bronze cauldron. The figures Su Shenxing saw just now were these two shadows, not real living people. At this time, Su Shenxing caught a glimpse of something floating in the bronze cauldron from the corner of his eye. So he went forward to take a look. He saw a head that had been boiled with dissolving muscles, revealing white bones, suddenly jumped out of the water and opened its mouth to bite Su Shenxing. In the face of this sudden change, Su Shenxing snorted lightly and flipped the head back into the water. At this moment, two more heads emerged from the boiling water and bit towards the ferocious head. Just like that, the three heads began to fight. By now, even Su Shenxing had vaguely guessed what was going on in this different space. He didn't care about the three heads. He just held the bronze cauldron's handle with one hand, as if he didn't feel the hot temperature, and punched the air with the other hand. This action didn't make any sound on the physical level, but Su Shenxing seemed to hear the sound of glass being broken. In the next moment, the surrounding scene shattered, and then the cauldron's fire and the corpses had disappeared. Even the simple hall disappeared. When everything stopped changing, Su Shenxing found himself in a basement. The minced meat still lying at the door proved that everything just now was not an illusion. The bronze cauldron he was holding was also gone, replaced by a huge stone tablet that still had the smell of earth. It was probably dug out of the ground not long ago, and there were three big words written in Chu seal script on it. He could understand Su Shenxing's protection order, and the words on it were, Tomb of the Three Kings. So that's how it is.
He sighed.
Perhaps not many people could understand the name Tomb of the Three Kings, but if there was another thing related to it, even if it wasn't well known, it was definitely popular. That was the legendary divine sword, Ganjiang Moi. Legend had it that Ganjiang Moi forged the sword for King Chu, and it took 3 years to complete. Ganjiang knew that it wouldn't bode well for him to present the sword, so he left the male sword behind and only brought the female sword to meet King Chu. As expected, he was cut down by King Chu. Moi gave birth to their child, Mei Jianqi. When he grew up, he told him about his father. Mei Jianqi took out the male sword and wanted to avenge his father, but King Chu accidentally found out about it. King Chu used a lot of money to capture Mei Jianqi, and the latter could only hide deep in the mountains. Later, Mei Jianqi met a swordsman who heard his story and decided to avenge Mei Jianqi. But to do so, he needed Mei Jianqi's head and the male sword Ganjiang. Mei Jianqi did not hesitate to cut his own throat with the sword, but his corpse immediately stiffened and stood upright. Only when the swordsman promised that he could avenge him did Mei Jianqi's corpse fall down as if it was at ease. The swordsman brought Mei Jianqi's head and the male sword, Ganjiang, to meet King Chu. King Chu was very happy, and according to the swordsman's instructions, he set up a bronze cauldron and wanted to boil Mei Jianqi's head. But even after 3 days and 3 nights, there was still no change. So the swordsman said that King Chu needed to put his face on the bronze cauldron to boil Mei Jianqi's head. King Chu did not doubt him and put his head on the cauldron. The swordsman took the opportunity to cut off King Chu's head with his sword, causing it to fall into the bronze cauldron. King Chu's head and Mei Jianqi's head were biting each other in the cauldron, unable to determine the winner. So the swordsman cut off his own head and threw it into the cauldron, attacking King Chu together with Mei Jianqi. By the time the officials of Chu arrived, the 3 heads had all rotted into a lump, unable to be distinguished. So they could only bury the 3 heads together, calling it the Tomb of the 3 Kings. Su Shenxing saw that the stone tablet seemed to have been unearthed not long ago, and there was no news about it recently. He vaguely guessed that Chiketsu's father was secretly buying and selling stolen artifacts obtained from tomb robbing, and in the end, attracted the vengeful spirit that lingered for thousands of years. That was why his entire family was implicated and died in a car accident. As for what the meat paste was, Su Shenxing was not too interested to know. At worst, he would deliberately trigger the alarm later and let the guards who woke up collect the corpse and investigate its identity. Just as Su Shenxing was about to leave the basement, he suddenly patted his head and whispered, "That's not right." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.